Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Apostle. I make videos and I host live streams discussing Islam critically, among other topics. Today, I'm joined by Secular Spirit, another ex-Muslim YouTuber. Hi, Secular Spirit. And we'll be taking a bunch of questions from the live chat and from questions that you've submitted either on Instagram in my stories or on Secular Spirit's post in the community post. So before we begin, are you looking forward to Ramadan? It's happening in a couple of days, right?
Nope, not really. I have to be honest. I left Islam quite a while ago now. I think it's 17 years or something like that. And it really isn't part of my day-to-day life anymore, especially because my relatives all live so far away from Canada where I live. And honestly, if I wasn't doing this stuff, YouTube channel, I probably wouldn't even notice it, which I think is a way I'm very lucky compared to a lot of other ex-Muslims who do have to kind of experience it or pretend to still be practicing.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much same here. If the occasional invite to an event here and there, that reminds me that it is Ramadan, but I don't really think about fasting anymore. It's not part of my routine, and I don't look forward to or dread Ramadan. And yeah, I also understand that that's privilege that I get to have compared to a bunch of other people who have to go through Ramadan. So I thought, I guess since Ramadan is coming up, maybe give people something to watch, get their minds off of it a little bit, or ask your questions, especially if they have to do with Ramadan. Now would be a great time to do that. Yeah, so the format is just going to be, we'll read some questions, we'll try to answer them, and maybe we'll take some from the live chat. Also, before we begin, I've never tried this feature before, but YouTube says that I should. So
And we must obey what YouTube says.
yeah, let's see what happens. So I set a goal for this live stream. No pressure, but if we reach that goal in super chats or whatever, I will donate $100 to Zakat. We'll talk about Zakat in a second. I guess it'll come up in the questions. So, do you want to begin or should I pick a question?
Well, maybe I'll just allude to your poll question, which is in the
Mm,
live chat as well. So I asked on my channel, on one of my community posts, a question to everyone. And it's something that I've been interested in a while, and I've done a video about also in past Ramadans. Maybe I could share that with you to include in the video description. I'll make a note to remember that. But basically, I've always been interested in the idea of whether Ramadan could eventually become more of a secularized holiday, kind of closer to what Easter or Christmas is like in the Western world. Obviously, there are quite a few Christians that still celebrate uh, uh, Christmas and Easter in a religious way. They go to church, so on and so forth, but many people do not. And so I was always wondering, because I loved a lot of aspects of Ramadan and the Eid that follows it, the community, the iftar meals, uh, less demanding school work and shortened work hours, so on and so forth. So I always thought, what if we could kind of keep that in a secular way? And so the question I asked everyone was, do you think it's possible that Ramadan could become something more secularized like Christmas is today? And when I did the poll, I got
wait, maybe
50%.
don't tell. Ah, damn it! You
Oh,
already
sorry.
told.
Well, just to see what the comparison is with your
Yeah.
audience, maybe it's going to be similar or maybe it'll be different. But for mine, it was basically half said no, 30% said yes, and I did include a not sure option that was 20%. So only 50% thought that it would be possible. And there were interesting reasons why. We'll get into those maybe a little bit, but if you want to answer that poll question for this live chat, it's up there as well. I already voted. I'm definitely in the no unsure camp personally, and that seems to be what's winning right now.
I will refrain from answering that question because I don't want to sway the people answering it. So we'll check
Okay.
in on the poll in a bit. Um, and we already have a super chat from Lissa Mora. Thank you so much, Lissa, for the super chat. She says Zakat sounds like an honorable thing to donate to. So you want to use this as an opportunity. Like let's first explain what is fasting and what is zakah for if someone's watching and they're not familiar. So the way that Christians fast and the way that Muslims fast are very different. Uh, And the way that Muslims do it, it's during Ramadan mostly. You could do it on other days as well,
You
but
can
it's
do it whenever
mandatory.
you want, really.
Yeah, but it is mandatory during
Mhm.
Ramadan at the very least. And um, there's a lot of details to it. We're not going to cover everything, but essentially, ever since you're an adult or you're no longer a child, you're expected to do it. And basically, you don't eat or drink anything from sunrise to sunset, not even water.
Not even
Um,
water.
yeah, and there's some talk about exceptions for that if you're too sick or if you're too old or too weak or something. If you have a medical condition, maybe you get an exemption, but you got to give money to charity to make up for the days that you missed. And the way that you got to do it is you got to pay zakat, and zakat is charity in Islam, but it's explicitly to other Muslims. So if you are to just give to whatever charity you want, it doesn't count as your zakat, which is the minimum of 2.5% of your stagnant income or your stagnant money every year. It's not really to a central location, like you don't have to give it to a central church or anything like that. It's just between you and God, supposedly. And but to qualify, you have to give it to other Muslims. You can't give zakat to a non-Muslim. So to answer the super chat, zakat is an honorable thing to do in concept, but it could be a bit better because you don't have to
Yeah.
gatekeep who gets your
The
charity.
idea of giving to others to help them is the honorable thing, but
Yeah.
to narrow it down to Muslims is the weird thing. I do remember liking it a lot in the sense of how you didn't have to just donate to like your local mosque or Islamic organization. You could just donate it to a struggling Muslim family, for example, that you happen to know in your neighborhood, so on and so forth, which I did like.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that covers some of the basics. So do you want to begin or should I begin with the questions?
You can go ahead. I was just thinking about how the whole no drinking water thing, it still kind of blows my mind when you think about how this idea to not drink water came from people living in the Middle East, in modern day Saudi Arabia specifically, which to me is kind of insane.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to editorialize too much or give my opinion too much about, all that right away. I just want to echo what
Sure,
people
sure.
think, so I will bite my
Yeah,
tongue for now.
maybe I should have saved this for a future answer.
Yeah,
Okay,
but
I'll
I have
stop
I have
talking.
thoughts. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, okay, so let's see some of the questions here. I like this question. This question is, how was your first Ramadan like as an ex-Muslim? What do you think? Do you remember your first Ramadan as an ex-Muslim?
Well, I will say this. So, uh, I would say the first time that I really just realized that I'm no longer a Muslim was the Ramadan when I was 18, and I just decided, you know what, I'm not going to bother fasting anymore. When I realized, when I made that decision within me to no longer fast, that's really the thing where, okay, I'm an atheist now. I'm an ex-Muslim, even though I didn't know the term ex-Muslim back then. So in that sense, I was still not talking about how I'd left with my family, so or anyone else. No one knew, but in that sense, my first Ramadan as an ex-Muslim, it was just a life as usual. Life is normal.
Yeah. In my case, I don't remember a particular Ramadan explicitly that, that's where everything ended, because it was a gradual process of leaving Islam, or at first, avoiding the practice because it kept reminding me of all the issues that I found in the religion and my faith and all that kind of stuff. At some point, I was just avoiding it. So I can't tell you exactly. There will be Ramadans where I would not fast some days, feel guilty about it, fast the next days, and so on. But it's been a while since I last, even attempted to fast. It's been years. So my first Ramadan, I guess I could describe it as generally, the that transition from someone who fasts and feels guilty about skipping to someone who doesn't feel guilty about not fasting anymore mostly happened when I deconstructed my beliefs and really accepted that, ex-Muslims exist and it's not just laziness, and there's something I'm missing there. I did my due diligence. I tried my best for years, and I realized, I don't believe. Why should I feel guilty about it? So it was a transition. It wasn't one particular Ramadan. Let's take a well. There's some more super chats. Thank you so much, the boy. Says Aladdin and Alim. Don't forget Alim. He's sitting right here. Summon Koke. Thank you so much for the super chat. Asks, do you guys like Lego?
I don't dislike it, Lego. I used to like
Yeah.
Lego as a kid. I used to build like entire cities with Lego. That I was much more practical minded than doing fantastical things with Lego. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed doing that as a kid. Now it's nice sometimes to just have a set and follow instructions and, kind of like a little IKEA, piece of furniture. I don't necessarily buy Lego brand, but I do have something in the background that is a kind of a, assembly plastic thing. I don't know if you call that a Lego, but yeah, I kind of like it. Next question. Let's see. Why does Islam not scare you anymore? The more I look into it, the more I'm convinced. What do you think?
Well, I would say it doesn't scare me anymore because I just the process of me leaving was me looking deeply into the reasons why I believed in the first place and realizing that those reasons weren't actually convincing. And once I opened myself up to the possibility that it could be not true, and I saw that those reasons I believed were not good, it just happened automatically. It's like being told that to use Santa, that Santa is real, but then seeing evidence that shows that Santa isn't real. You're not worried about if Santa is real or not.
Yeah, for me, it's I didn't include that part on screen, but the person asking the question said that the more they look into it, the more scared they are. Let's think about why that is. In my case, the more I look into it as someone who is, already familiar with the religion, but the more I find and the more I talk to even, religious scholars, not just the casual believer, the more I realize that there's nothing really that I seem to be missing. There's no magical explanation that's right out of my field of view. I'm sure there's a lot I don't know about Islam. I'm not saying I'm an expert on it, but in terms of, the big questions that I have, the big problems, there is no answer that's so evasive that I haven't found it in years of searching and no one else seems to have found it. So the more I look, the more problems I find, the more unanswerable questions, the more rhetorical questions even that I find, and the more sure I am of that, yeah, that there's nothing about that. Um, and the more that I look into other religions, the similarities that I find also reassure me that either, all of them are somehow correct or like equally valid, or, especially if they're mutually exclusive, more likely most of them are man-made, all of them are man-made. So yeah, with time, the more familiar you get, the less scared you are. Now, the question here is, why is fear part of this at all? And I could
Mm-hmm.
talk about this for, a long time, but how do you feel about Islam and its use of fear instead of evidence?
Well, I don't want to assume that this is exactly what the person who asked the question was thinking about, but for me, typically the fear is kind of related to the whole Pascal's wager thing of, even though we might not know for sure that Islam is not true, better to just profess belief in it just in case so you can avoid going to hell. And I think changing your perspective or attitude on questions like that is the key to not being afraid anymore, and was definitely the key for me. And I always remember this one thing that Richard Dawkins once said. I think someone asked him something similar, and he pointed out, well, what about the thousand other gods or religious propositions that exist, some of which may threaten some kind of punishment or hell? You're not worried about those, are you? The Muslim is not worried about whether or not Christianity is true. So why are you worried, or the Norse gods being real or not? So why are you worried about this one thing? So I think by highlighting all these other examples, it kind of shows how, in a way, it's not really a good way to lead your life to believe things just because you might be afraid they might be real.
Yeah. And there are a lot of things we could think of that are even more terrifying than what Islam describes. But just because we can think of them and just because someone made a case for them and wrote it down in a book doesn't mean that that's something you should actually be afraid of. It's not a way
Precisely.
to live your life. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that question of doubt. I think when it comes down to it, well, none of us can 100% rule out that the God of Islam isn't real. and that hell isn't real. But just because we can't rule something out 100% doesn't mean that we ought to just believe it just in case, because then we'd be believing all sorts of things that we make up in our own minds or that others tell us are real. And isn't that what a lot of cults do?
Yeah.
So we don't waste our time with that stuff. So if we look at it from that kind of bigger, grander scale, and realize that most of us were Muslim because we were born into it, then we start to see that maybe just believing it just out of fear is not the best way to lead your life.
And even if you're not born into it, I've spoken to people who aren't even necessarily converts yet. Sometimes they just hear enough about Islam, especially from these like reels and TikToks and stuff, that they become afraid that what if it's true and what if all this hell stuff is true? So it's just a fear of all of that being true without even believing, the rest of the religion. They don't necessarily even know the details. They're just afraid that there's a possibility that this is true. And I think I've spoken about this before. This is kind of like how they get gamblers, or people who
That's
play
a
the
good
lottery.
comparison.
Yeah, it's think about it, but the other way around. So if someone, plays the lottery all the time, the chances of them winning are very, very small, like a tiny, tiny fraction. And if you multiply it by, 50 or whatever, however many times they've played, it doesn't get that much bigger, because it's such a tiny fraction. But the way that
That
they get
next
them,
time, that next time is going to be the one.
and not just that, the magnitude of the prize, like if you're doing
Mm.
all this for a $50 prize, you're going to stop at some point because you've spent, close to $50, but you will never spend enough for, the transaction to not be worth it if you someday win. So even if I give, all my savings, say, I have $5,000, for example, and I give all of that, but in return, I get $50 million. That sounds like a worthy trade, right? And Islam and religion in general that uses hell and fear is the same thing with heaven, but also with hell it's the other way around. The magnitude of suffering is infinite, so you can afford to put in a lot of suffering in this life just to avoid that in case it's even true. So don't fall for that. And the question always becomes, why is God incapable of proving religion and proving that this religion is connected to him instead of just fear mongering and scaring people into believing?
Because it's a test.
And
Duh.
Allah knows best.
And Allah knows best.
Thomas, thank you so much for the 2 super chats. Boys,
Ooh,
we're all
wow.
donating today to Zakat. I mean, I said Zakat in quotes, what's it? In quotes? Yeah, in quotes. I'm not actually necessarily just gonna give charity to Muslims, but I'll give it to a worthy cause, I promise. Do you have a question, or should I move on to another one?
Let's see. I didn't have many, but I did have a couple I wanted to just share. So hold on, I'll share this one with you in the private chat. So this one was from McGeiler. Sorry if I butchered that pronunciation.
Yeah,
In
Mickey.
the
I know who that is.
Oh, you know
Yeah.
who that is. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'll put that in the live chat if it fits. So the question was, I wonder if you still participate in some Ramadan traditions or maybe even do some kind of fasting, and if you gain any personal benefit from that.
Do you still participate in some Ramadan traditions? Do I do fasting? Not at all, because I've always heard about, especially Muslims quoting some kind of benefit, medical benefit to fasting. But the more that I look into it, the more that I realize it's not fasting the way that Islam does it, because it'll be like intermittent fasting or like fasting while drinking water. And
And you're drinking water. That's the key thing I wanted
yeah,
to mention. You're still
there's
drinking
a
water.
bunch of that. Nowhere does intermittent fasting involve stuffing your face, before and after the fast. And I don't say that to blame the people who do it. Like, it's just a natural response to your hunger. You want to fill your tank and you want to fill it again because you've been starving all day. And also, it doesn't take into account how different geographic locations have different lengths of days. So for some people, fasting is going to be 20 hours or 16 hours or whatever. For some, it's 8 or 10, which is something weird that Allah didn't necessarily take into account or bother to mention. But that is what we have to deal with. So no, I don't fast for any personal benefit. Do I
Do you do
participate
anything
in?
else?
I mean, what else is there? Like, there's reading the Quran, there's prayer, that kind of stuff. I don't do
Would you
that in.
count the iftar as part of it? I would say it's a tradition, right?
Yeah, breaking your fast. I do that when when I'm invited to an iftar, and I'm nice enough to not be drinking water or eating in front of them once I get there, but I'm not fasting that day. I just, don't eat till the prayer time when I'm there. And yeah, I don't mind that, especially when I've become more comfortable telling them, yeah, I'm not joining you for prayer. Because often, what people do at iftar is sometimes they start eating, sometimes they just, break their fast and they go pray and then they return. And I've been more confident now to be able to tell them that, I'm going to sit this one out and I'll see you at dinner. So, not everyone is able to do that. Sometimes that means outing themselves as an apostate, and the people around them don't react to that well. So, I can understand people who even avoid everything together because they don't want to be forced into behaving in a way that they don't believe in. So, this answer depends on who you ask, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, would you count me having a late night snack around 2 a.m. as a Ramadan tradition as well? Because I
No,
do that all the time, not just in Ramadan.
no, you don't. Unless you also drink water till the moment that you hear the adhan, like we all used to do.
I never used to do that. Just speaking for myself, I always felt like it kind of defeated the purpose of it.
No, it's allowed. It's within the rules. So,
Yeah, but you know what I mean. Like
yeah,
it's against the what's the word of it? The oh my god, I'm blanking on the word. It's against the
the
spirit of it.
spirit of
Yeah.
the rule. I also wanted to mention something, by the way. There are real negative harms to someone being forced to fast, and one of the harms that I can think of, aside from being exhausted and dehydrated, and maybe a higher risk of getting a kidney stone if you're not drinking enough. There's also, if you have to take medication. Sure, Muslims say that, if you consult the books of law, they say that if you have to take a medication, well, they didn't know about medication back in the day, but like if you are sick, then you can skip and make up for it. But if someone has to take a medication, it's not always that the people around them or the people with religious authority in their life allow them to take that license to not fast. Because if you're supposed to take your medication in the middle of the day, or like, not at night, or not, yeah, especially not at night, I mean, um, it might be very difficult for you to alter that schedule. Like, it might actually affect your sleep. It might affect your health, especially if it has to do with mental health medication or stuff that takes a while to work, not just the day that you take it. So it is a real problem that people sometimes have to suffer because even medical professionals in the Middle East and in Muslim majority countries will sometimes give you bad advice, as in just defer your medication till nighttime because fasting is more important. So there are real harms, done by forcing fasting on people who don't want to fast. And I'd argue that fasting in general is not really a good thing for your health, but some people think it is. So they're free to do it. But yeah, I certainly don't miss fasting against my will. But I did it. I did it for Allah. Good times. Here's a question. I'm an ex-convert. What should I do if one of my Muslim friends reaches out during Ramadan?
That's a tough one. Well, maybe we can just hypothetically ask what think of some scenarios of what they would be reaching out about. So maybe I remember when I first left, I had Muslim friends saying, "Come to the mosque with me," for
Mhm.
example. Uh, would that be like a good example to talk about, you think?
Sure, yeah. If they invite the person to go to the mosque, how should they react?
I think that that puts you in a tough position because you either have to pretend when you and just go along with it, or you have to lie and say, "Oh, I'm busy," or "I'm already doing it with other friends," or "I'm doing it with my family," or you just tell them the truth, which comes with uh, consequences of its own. Maybe they won't be your friends anymore. You might get ostracized. Who knows? It might be even worse. So I think it really depends on what kind of circumstance
Mhm.
you're in. If they're not part of your tight knit community, and you live, let's say, in the Western world, I would honestly support just being honest and saying that, I don't practice anymore. I appreciate you reaching out, but this isn't part of what I do anymore. Some variation
Mhm.
of that. But obviously, I think if there's a bit more risk to doing it, then some pretense or excuses might be necessary.
I would say something similar, but also it really depends. Like, if you know that they're gonna react negatively, or be a bit of a nuisance about it to you just being open about not believing anymore, then maybe it's in your best interest to maybe even not respond if you don't feel like it. But if you do want to respond, just tell them the truth. What you shouldn't do, especially if you don't have to do as an ex convert, is pretend to still be a believer or go along with what they want you to go along with, especially if they start bargaining and saying, well, okay, I know you're not, but how about you just come pray Tarawih with us or something? Don't do that. Don't kind of give concessions. Just set your boundaries, tell them the truth. And if they still want to be your friend, that's great. And even then, be alert. If they still trying to bother you about the topic, then you have the right to end the friendship at any point. But till then, you're also free to accept them reaching out to you.
Yeah.
Alyssa, yeah, sorry, go ahead. You want to
Oh,
say
I was
something?
just gonna say that the tough thing, and this was in my own personal experience, is I think in every instance they never the Muslim friends I'm talking about who would reach out to me, they never took no the first time or the second time or the third time. They would keep trying even after I said, "Oh, I'm no longer practicing. Oh no,
Hmm.
I'm not interested." They would still keep trying, and that's what makes it a bit harder too.
Yeah. Lissa, thanks for the super chat. Asks, it's my understanding that if you have health concerns, you are able to not fast. Am I wrong in this? Yeah. So like we were saying, yes, the if you ask the most scholars, they say that if you have health concerns, you don't have to fast, but you have to make up for it either later, or if you can't, you have to, feed a family instead, like do zakat instead, which is not necessarily a bad thing unless you can't afford to. Then you feel guilty and you have to force yourself to fast. Like there is no outlet for those who can't afford to feed someone else. Like they have to then, do the fast some other time. But also, like I said, not everyone takes that license. Even if they want to, sometimes they feel guilty. Like, what is sick enough to not fast?
Yeah,
You
it's
know?
it's often self-imposed, even though you're taking the own risk.
Yeah. And sometimes it's not self-imposed. Sometimes the people around you, especially if you have something that's not just passing, like that's not acute, not just a flu that's going to pass in a few days, but a chronic illness, and it's not visible, you get a lot of judgment from people asking, "Why aren't you fasting? You don't look sick," or and so on. So it's not as simple as just saying, "Leave me alone. I'm not supposed to fast today. I have license to not fast." Sometimes there's a bit more pressure than that. But yeah, technically the rule is you don't have to fast when you're sick. Lissa, again, thank you for the super chat. Again, asks, at what age does Ramadan start for children? Someone mentioned that they started Ramadan in high school. Is that typical? Do they have to fast, or is it a choice? Generally curious.
I don't know if there's a general rule for this. I
I think
remember
it's
being
puberty.
taught that puberty, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
But the only reason I say I don't think there's a general rule is because I remember growing up in Dubai that there were kids that were fasting way before puberty. In like fourth, fifth grades, there were a lot of people already fasting. So I think it's an element of it's kind of a cool thing to do because you're more grown up and adult when you do it. So I think a lot of kids, myself included, wanted to do it as early as possible because you feel, wow, I'm so grown up and mature now for doing this.
yeah. It's kind of similar to the ruling on women and hijab. There
Oh,
are
precisely. Yeah.
Yeah, there are little girls that even, before hitting puberty, they just want to be like their, mother or sister or friends or whoever, and they want to be part of that group and they want to be cool like that. So they start wearing the hijab early, or sometimes it's the parents getting them like used to it. So even though the rule is, once you hit puberty, because in Islam, once you hit puberty, which is not a particular day, but somehow once you know one of the markers, then you are now viewed as an adult in front of God, and you're now eligible to go to heaven or hell. Before that, you could only go to heaven if you had died before hitting puberty. Um, and is it mandatory? Yes, everyone has to fast Ramadan. Again, unless you're incapable because of illness or something like that, or if you're traveling, then again you can postpone it and do it later. But generally, everyone has to do it, kind of like prayer. Everyone has to do it 5 times a day. Ramadan, you have to fast. And some people go above and beyond by fasting extra just to, you know, get more points, or, to make up for sins that they've done before, and so on. Um, so it depends. Ismail asks, this one's not an ex-Muslim problem, but in Ramadan, I have problems hanging out with my friends since they feel bad eating in front of me, so I'm left alone. How do I get them to be chill about it? So the person asking is a Muslim that
Is a
fasts.
Muslim.
Yeah.
I think the only thing you can really do is just keep communicating that you're comfortable with it, you don't mind. I don't know what else you could do beyond that. Do you have any suggestions?
No, just tell them honestly.
Yeah.
Tell them, look, you might even want to. I mean, I don't particularly love this, but you could spin it as I get more hasanat if I'm watching you eat, which some people think
I
that
haven't.
way.
I've never heard that before. Is that a real thing? Wow. Okay.
Just the general sentiment of the more you suffer, or the more you suffer, the more hasanat you get, the more good deeds you get. So if it's an especially hot day, or if you're especially tired, you
Mm.
get more good deeds. In a similar vein, if you live somewhere where other people are eating and around you, you get extra good deeds because you're suffering while watching them. I'm not saying you should do that to get more points. I'm saying if they're really that sensitive, you might want to spin it as I want this. But honesty is the best policy, which is, guys, I don't mind. I just want to hang out with you. Don't worry about me and my hunger. It's actually making it weirder, and I'm being more excluded if you don't hang out with me.
Mhm.
Which reminds me, I have a friend who wanted to set up a potluck at work, and someone reached out and said, "Hey, it's going to be Ramadan. You can't do that." And it's unclear whether the person who reached out is Muslim or not. They're from a Middle Eastern background, but it bothered me because, it seemed like some of the Muslims even were saying, I can't make it, but, I hope you guys enjoy. But sometimes there are people, believers or not, who really want to impose it on everyone, or like go out of their way to not offend people who are participating. But it shouldn't be that way. If you want to
No.
participate, you don't want to eat, you're welcome to, but it shouldn't affect how other people behave around you. And that's not what the person asking the question is saying. They're doing it, it's self-imposed, and they want them to stop doing it. So just talk to them.
Yeah. What do you think of this idea for maximum hasanat? You spend the entire day in a sauna, cranked up to the maximum, and you wear
I
one of those
mean,
garbage bags. Have you ever seen like boxers or people like that do that to
right.
like
To
lose
sweat.
weight?
Yeah.
Oh, on a treadmill in a sauna. Oh
That
wow,
that doesn't count
to
because,
paradise right away.
nope. No, that doesn't count. It has to be for a good reason. So you wanna go out and volunteer while you're
To
fasting?
be closer with Allah. How could that not be
No.
a good reason?
No, it's not. But also, I don't encourage that. Like, even if you're doing something productive, like you go out to volunteer while fasting, to get extra points, don't do it for that reason. You wanna volunteer, do it when you're better rested. Don't exert yourself for hasanat, for brownie points. I don't think that's good for you at all. And it's not good to set up that mentality of the more I suffer, the better this is for me, because that's not
No.
always true. Not at all. Even in training, you see these montages in movies of a guy training, and he's just doing 1,000 push-ups and like doing a bunch of crazy things. That's not how you get better. That's not how you make progress. So don't overexert yourself to be some kind of a martyr for the religion. That's my opinion. Um, Summon, okay. Thank you for the super chat as well. It looks like the
We're
goal is
looking
maybe,
good.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're getting there. Even if we don't get there, I'm still gonna donate, but this was fun. They're relaying someone else's chat. That's nice of them. Says, I'm an atheist from India in a Muslim family. My parents are too toxic for everything like reading the Quran, and remembering it. They don't even care about my mental health. How should I deal with them? Any thoughts?
That one's a tough one for me because I never really had those issues with my parents. They were pretty accepting. So I don't know what to say really. What would you say?
So I want to explain to the people watching, if they're not aware, uh, the Quran. You're highly encouraged by a lot of parents and people around you to not just read it but memorize it and be able to recite it. And depending on whether or not Arabic is your first language, you might even have a higher barrier or higher expectation of being able to remember, not just start reciting from here, but I'll give you a certain verse and you finish it, and so on. So some people even compete on how well they can memorize the Quran. And sometimes parents impose it on their children, even if they don't speak the language. You have to phonetically kind of be able to make those sounds while not really understanding what you're saying. So some people think it's fun, some people hate it, but when you're forced to do it, it really, really sucks. And trust me, I know. I used to memorize the Quran and I didn't always like it. So the person here seems to be forced to memorize the Quran and do a bunch of things that they don't want to do and they don't believe in, and they don't care about their mental health, because with parents like that, it's not necessarily because they're bad people. I don't know this set of parents, but when your priorities are either, save my son or daughter from being tortured forever, or care about little silly things like their mental health, you know, hell takes precedence. Avoiding hell takes precedence. So sometimes that's what happens. Um, how should the person deal with them? There's nothing that you can do necessarily to change their behavior. You can try to have a conversation with them about it, maybe even frame it as, temporarily while you're still under their roof and you're forced to live by their rules. Maybe frame it as, I want to have a better relationship with God than the one that you're forcing me to have in this way. Even if you don't necessarily believe, maybe them letting you have your own version of practice that is more lenient and less, strict and rules based, that would be a bit of a relief. Maybe tell them that their strictness is kind of forcing you away from Islam, and that's not helping. Things of that nature, till you are able to, be independent enough to not have to deal with those rules anymore. But unfortunately, aside from talking to them, depending on how they react to that, again, I don't know this specific situation, there's not much you can do except hope for the future and plan for the future. Have a goal to work towards instead of being focusing too much on how you feel in that situation. Think of how much better you will feel once you're out of that situation, and figure out the steps that you need to take to get to that point. So, study extra hard, work extra hard so you can be independent enough financially to then maybe take that step and, enforce some boundaries between you. But in the meantime, try to just reframe what you're doing. You're working hard towards your goal. You're not just forced to be where you are forever.
Mhm. You remind me of something that I've heard from some ex-Muslims who are like, still closeted, that has worked with varying degrees of success, is sending YouTube videos, or I don't know, Instagram reels or whatever, of more progressive Islamic scholars,
Mm.
or imams, to kind of just show to their parents and say, well, this person says we should prioritize our mental health more, or that we shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that, as a way of trying to show, well, it's not me saying it, it's this respected religious authority. And I don't know if that would always work or it would work in this instance, but I do know that that's something that some ex-Muslims do.
That is a really good idea, actually, because sometimes the parents or the person, in the position of authority doesn't take you seriously. And if you were to give them the same talking point from someone, they might take their opinion more seriously, like a devout Muslim or a promoter of Islam. Maybe that'll sway their mind, which is unfortunate, because it's really an admission that such people are just swayed by influential figures, or even just anyone with a
Yeah,
hint of influence. Anyone with the aura of someone who is trustworthy, at least in this domain. It doesn't even have to be a good person. It's just someone who speaks their language, in a sense, of
exactly.
Islam.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, that's kind of what religions do, though. They kind of teach us to just respect these figures in a position of authority. So,
yeah,
I would never endorse sharing videos from people like Shabir Ali, or Yasser Qadi, generally speaking, but uh, I think they are more progressive in some ways than some of the other sheikhs and scholars that exist in the world.
yeah. I There are a bunch of other super chats, and thank you for that. I want to read them, but I also want to give a couple of more questions a chance. So you want to go, or should I go?
I just have one other question, and it's connected to something we already talked about. So,
Sure,
if you have nothing new to add to it, then we
go
can just
for it.
skip it. But the question was, during Ramadan, charity zakat is a very big thing. How do you feel about it now, as an ex-Muslim? And I'll share that question so you can highlight it.
Yeah. Uh, we pretty much answered that already, right? Do you have any other thoughts?
Well, so the thing that makes me think that this is pretty interesting is one of the arguments that you'll hear from religious people, I've heard it from Christians and Muslims alike, is that when you're a believer, you're more motivated to do things like zakat or tithe, or to give back, essentially. And that when you there's less of an incentive to do that when you're an atheist, because you don't have these religious institutions making you do it, essentially. And I can honestly say in my case that I definitely don't donate to charity that much as an individual in the time that I've been an ex-Muslim. So I do wonder if there is something to that, or something to where if you're belonging to an institution that encourages it or even makes it kind of obligatory, that might be a good thing. So I'm kind of torn about that.
I like the reminder aspect of it. You know, everyone's doing it kind of communally. Might as well do it, or oh, I haven't done it in a while. I'm a similar way. I I donate every now and then, but I've got so much on my radar that it doesn't always come to mind. So it's a good idea to have it, come to mind once a year. But as someone had pointed out to me before, that this doesn't exactly, like, some people think that this Islamic model of zakat once a year, and especially during Ramadan, an influx of money that will help the poor or the unfortunate. Not really. Like, you need more social services. You need a something to do with that money. So giving money once a year in and of itself doesn't solve the society's problems, but it is a good reminder to give money if you haven't been. But where I differ is I've been avoiding especially the charities that say this is for the purposes of zakah, because Islamically, like I said, that is different than even a charity that is based in the Middle East but doesn't specify that this money is going to zakah, because zakah is like, it has different rules. So I avoid those because I don't want my money to go to specifically one group. But I do donate to organizations that help a lot of Muslims. Like, for example, in my home country, there are a lot of Muslims there. So I'm not really selecting to avoid Muslims, but I don't want to select only Muslims. That feels biased in the wrong way. Yeah, so I hope that explains that. Any other questions from your end?
No,
I
no,
still got a
that's it
bunch.
for me.
All right. Let's see. I'll get to the super chats in a second, but I'll take one more question. This is kind of a rhetorical question. Isn't it hypocritical to use logic to reject other religions, but ignore logic when it comes to yours? Yeah, I mean, there's not much to
Yeah, it
say about
is.
that.
It reminds me of those, those debates where they have Q&As at the end and the people walk up and they line up to ask the questions, and then it's just like one big rhetorical thing. Yeah, I agree. It is illogical.
Yeah. This one, I really need more context from the person asking the question, but I'll take a shot. Why, when you become an atheist, you become alone, you cannot find a partner or even to celebrate? That really depends on where you are in the world. Obviously, if you live among a lot of Muslims, then that is very alienating, and depends again on the kind of Muslims that are around you. Sometimes that means that you can't be yourself anymore. And it's not necessarily even that you want to be an atheist all the time, like talk about atheism or anything, but you will be forced to do things or share opinions that you don't have. Otherwise, you'll be outed as an atheist. That's the problem. So it can be very isolating for people, but it's not like that everywhere. And hopefully, it's not like that forever. I mean, part of the effort that a lot of us are working on is to make Muslims know, even in Muslim countries and Muslim communities, that we exist among them and we're not the scary monster they think we are. Um, but till then, try to find other people like you. There are a lot more of them than you think.
I'm sorry, what was the question exactly? I had trouble
Why is it
following it.
that when you become an atheist, you become alone and you can't even find a partner to celebrate with? And often, again, I need context about this person's life and location and so on, but often when that is the case, it's because everyone around them is so different, and not just different, but even possibly hostile towards them, or even passive aggressively hostile towards them. It really depends. So it's because the people around you are not accommodating to that. They're not tolerant. And I don't know what to do about the intolerance of people who want tolerance for themselves. It's hypocritical.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at it from a different perspective, what this really shows is the reason why so many people remain believers despite their doubts because they don't want to be in that position where they end up alone and isolated, and it's just easier to essentially just go with the flow of what everyone else is doing and believing, which is one of the reasons why organized religions are so sticky and why they endure for so long.
Yeah. Still got some more super chats. Lissa, thank you so much. Extremely generous of you. She asks or says, the reason I asked about the health concerns is I only eat once a day. It's all my body allows me due to my health. It's been like this for 15 years now. I have many different reasons for this, health reasons for this, and I'm under the care of a team of doctors. That is fascinating. I've never heard of that, diet method before, but if it works for you and if you're, seeing a doctor and the doctor is, green lighting it, then you're fine. But yeah, I'm glad that you found a way that works for you. For most people, eating once a day is not really, it doesn't really work for them.
No.
And another super chat from Lissa. Again, thank you.
Wow.
She asks, so I would feed a family if I was not able to fast. My faith doesn't require me to fast, but I'm trying to understand everything about all the different things, about different types of beliefs. Yeah, and we appreciate the questions. I mean, that's why we try to explain context. I guess that's a good segue. So sometimes I post a poll and the results indicate how big of an audience I have, or what percentage of them are ex-religious or ex-Muslim and what percentage are not or never Muslim. And one of those polls recently, I've been getting a lot of views from people who were interested in my last video, including a lot of Christians that, that kind of hit the algorithm. That's Christianity versus Islam algorithm. So a lot of people from that algorithm have answered my poll as well. And it seems like I have a lot of viewers recently that are not Muslim, never have been Muslim. And I get asked that question sometimes by Muslims and ex-Muslims. How do you feel about that? Are you comfortable with having so many never Muslims in your audience? And I say yes, because it depends on what their intention is, what they're looking for from the content, and how I'm catering to them or not catering to them. If you and I here are explaining things and giving them the context that they're missing, then I think that's helpful, because that's something that they learned about Muslims and Islam and ex-Muslims that they didn't know before. But if we're here just talking about this is everything that is wrong with Islam and only Islam, and there's no other religion that's as bad as Islam, then we're just fear-mongering and maybe taking advantage of their fear to, take donations or whatever. That I don't approve of. So I'm welcoming to people from different religious backgrounds, as long as they're not using our content to, prop up their religion or participate in a like a tit for tat kind of argument with another religion. How do you feel about that?
I have the same thing where there's the same phenomenon where there's definitely I wouldn't be able to quantify it exactly, but there is a chunk of my audience that's the same thing, never were Muslim, and for me, as long as I stick to my principles and sharing my perspective on things honestly and thoroughly, which is one of the reasons why I often talk about the dangers of organized religions like Christianity beyond just Islam, then I think I'm fine. And then if it's reaching people with different agendas or different perspectives, as long as I'm sticking to my intentions, it's all good.
Yeah. Agreed. Let's take this question from Raisa. Thoughts on restraint regarding romantic/sexual activities during Ramadan. I always thought it was hilarious but sad the way folks would break up those dating temporarily during Ramadan. What do you think about that?
So what do they mean by the second part? The way folks would
So
break up?
let me explain that, and because I've seen that in my life and
Mm,
in people around me. There'll be a Muslim dating a non-Muslim, and they're dating and doing things that might be considered haram, including dating in general is not really allowed in Islam, but also especially if there's a explicit romantic feelings shared and maybe physical intimacy, that's not at all allowed. But there are Muslims who do that guiltily, and they're struggling with their religious
mm,
identity. When Ramadan comes around, it's a time when, even if it's not with someone else, like even masturbation is even more haram during Ramadan, and it will break your fast. Having a lustful thought and following through on it will break your fast. So it's a bigger sin than just the sin on its own. You're also missing out a day of fasting. And there's this sense of this aura of forced religiosity in Ramadan, and everyone's kind of more paranoid, even though God's watching you all the time, supposedly. But in Ramadan, it's even more shameful to do the shameful things. So there are Muslims who, they feel so guilty about it that they break up with their partner during Ramadan, or they go, if they live together, they go spend the month at their parents' place or something. I've seen that happen in people's lives around me, and it's really sad because I can tell that they're struggling with their religious identity, but it also sucks to be on the receiving end of that. Like, imagine your boyfriend, it's usually boyfriend, but boyfriend or girlfriend saying, I'm sorry, but being with you makes me feel guilty and bad about myself. That's even if they articulate it that much. And I can't see you for a month because this is bad. We're doing something bad. This is a sin. And you just feel gross because from your
Mhm.
perspective, you start even wondering, did I force them into anything? Like, did I participate in making them feel guilty?
Am I a bad influence in their lives?
Yeah. Like, should we not be together even though I didn't do anything wrong? And so on. So sometimes people get angry at that and they're like, well, look at the hypocrites. They want to have their cake and eat it too. There's that, but there's also people who are just deeply struggling with their religious identity that they keep flip flopping, and they're trying to live a life that's compatible with the
Mm.
world around them, but at the same time, they're trying to force themselves into the box of, being a practicing Muslim because they have to, or else they'll go to hell or bring shame to themselves and their family and so on.
It really is just sad. It's awful. Oh, it's one of those things where I think if you're someone who's a non-Muslim and you're dating or in a relationship with uh, a Muslim, and they tell you something along those lines where we need to stop doing this or not even see each other during Ramadan, it's a red flag, and it's a potential issue that might get even worse further down the relationship. Let's say if you get married or you start having kids. So in a way, it could actually be a good thing if that happens to you, because it's an indicator that you might have some serious issues that you need to resolve further down the road, and you might as well address them then.
But it's only a good thing if you take action and set
Yeah.
boundaries and enforce them. But if you just keep flip-flopping with them, that's not good.
No.
Don't let them do that,
No.
to you. It's not good for you, it's not good for them even. So yeah. And thank you, Lean, for, highlighting this part explicitly. It's not just necessarily a relationship with non-Muslims. Sometimes it's two Muslims together, but it's any haram relationship in general, romantic ones before marriage, anything extramarital, either before marriage or whatever else. It's like the faith hits them only for 1 month of the year. It's sad. It's not necessarily just that they only believe this month of the year. Maybe they don't even believe that much. It's just that the guilt and
Yeah.
fear
Yeah.
gets
They just feel it a bit more. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's really hard too, because I think this connects to the whole shame about sexuality thing, that is one of the worst harms of Islam, and that a lot of Muslims believe is actually a good thing. But Ramadan worsens that feeling of shame and guilt about just natural, what I would say are just natural urges that you shouldn't be ashamed about. I've talked about this on my channel, but I remember Ramadan, what I would do was, once I hit puberty, I would start making this vow of some sort of, I don't know if you call it chastity exactly, because I wasn't dating, but I would vow to myself, I'm not going to masturbate for the entire month of Ramadan. And of course, I would just then keep doing it the rest of the year.
Mhm.
But it just heightened that feeling of shame about something that's completely normal, and
Yeah.
it makes it seem as if it's like almost like a harmful addiction, a harmful sin, and that definitely can cause a lot of psychological damage, and it definitely did for me.
Yeah. Let's try one of these on for size. Superman says,
Where did that come from?
"Can a
Okay.
universe come into existence from nothing? Think." So to translate to the audience, because I understand where the person is coming from, the context is they're asking, how could you not believe that a
Yeah, yeah.
God exists? Because
Well,
how
is he
could the
coming
universe
from nothing?
yeah, like, but then the question becomes, did God come from nothing? But religious people are expecting that question, and they're told to think that it's a ridiculous question. If someone asks
Yeah.
you, then who created God? Then they're silly. Don't take them seriously. But it is a real question. But in it, there's also this false dichotomy of either I believe in your particular religion and that there is a God and it spoke to us in the way that you think it spoke to us, or that I believe that everything popped out of nowhere and I know how it happened. there's a lot of in between. There could be one or multiple entities or forces that created all of this that we don't know and will never know, but it doesn't necessitate that therefore they must have spoken to us in this one way 1400 years ago in Arabic specifically. That doesn't follow.
Yeah, and also, what's wrong with just saying I don't know? Why does it have to be we came from nothing? I don't believe that. I just say I don't know.
Yeah. But I mean, to you and I, we could say, I don't know, because there are no stakes. You can say, I
Yeah.
don't know, and you move on with your life and you try to figure out how to have a happy life. Sorry. But when someone comes from a mindset of, fear and anxiety about, well, am I going to go to hell if I accept that I don't know? What if I don't know that Allah is real and it turns out He is and He's going to put me in hell? It doesn't scare us anymore to think of a scary God that gets really upset that you don't acknowledge it. I think it's detestable. It's pathetic behavior. So why would God
Mm.
behave in a pathetic and sad way? God should at
Allah
least
knows
love
best.
itself. Yeah.
Allah knows best. The thing that I wanted to just add to that is, look, the person who asked that question added think in the end. I see these kinds of things as an attempt to escape the emotional blind faith aspect of belief, to root it into something that's logic and rationality based, when I would say it's not logical and rational to just believe Islam is true because you can't think of a better answer.
Yeah. And lean reminds me of an analogy that I've given a few times before. So if you've
The
heard it,
winking car.
I apologize. Yeah. So I actually have a model car right here. I should have brought for the analogy, but anyway, imagine, I come out of my house and I find my car missing. Say I have a car and it's missing, and my neighbor says, "Hey, you want to know what happened to your car?" And I say, "What happened to my car?" And he says, "It winked at me and then it drove away, like Herbie, from that movie." And I don't know what happened to the car. From my perspective, my answer is I don't know what happened to the car. I have some hypotheses, like maybe, maybe I parked it somewhere else and I forgot. Maybe my partner has the keys, for example, and they took it. If that's not applicable, maybe someone stole it. If I see glass on the floor where the car was, then someone might have broken the window and taken the car, for example. There are clues I might follow, but even if I don't know, maybe it was towed to, somewhere and I don't know where that is, at least I could say, "I don't know," and that's a better answer than, it winked and drove away, or it flew into the sky, because I've never seen that. There's no precedent for that happening, but there is precedent for everything else
Mm.
happening, and I'm okay with not knowing which one it is till I have more evidence and more clues. So, yeah, just because I don't know yet doesn't mean, and I might never know, doesn't mean that I have to accept the one answer that you say confidently. That's my analogy for that.
And you just came up with a winking car as an example.
I don't know why I always think of Herbie, that beetle, that bug.
No, no, no. It's fine. It's fine. It works well. It's just it's interesting.
Yeah,
So now I'll know to reference the winking car analogy from Apostate Latin. Okay.
yeah. Um, let's see. Yasmin says, as a woman, I was taught masturbating can be dangerous because you can get possessed by a lover jinn. Do you boys have something similar?
Ooh, I have to be honest. This is the first time I heard of that. What I was taught was a few things. There's the dumbest one, which is that you'll grow hairy knuckles and everyone will know that you masturbate. Um, but the other one was that things like it will dilute your sperm, and so you won't be able to have children when you're an adult, and that a lot of men, they can't have kids because they masturbated too much as teenagers. That was taught to me by my biology teacher. Wrap your mind around that. But Jinn related things, no.
I heard it later on in my life, not when I was younger, but for women explicitly. And I didn't hear
Wow.
it in my life, but there's and different cultures have different ideas about it that are all kind of loosely related to Islam. It would be something like a jinn lover might possess you if you go outside without a hijab, for example, or if you. I didn't hear about the masturbation thing, but it makes sense that it would be one of those. Thankfully, I didn't hear that, and I'm sorry that you did, and I hope that you've unpacked that and
Mhm.
moved on from it, because I know it can stick with you even if you don't believe in it anymore.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, that fear. Like, someone should tell them that fear doesn't really. I mean, maybe it works, but it's not ethical to use fear in lieu of evidence, don't you think?
No, it works, but then it has all these unintended consequences and repercussions.
And it doesn't work as a way to determine the truth. It works as a
No,
method of coercion, but not
which,
really.
which you could argue is what religions are
Yeah,
about.
depends on the religion, but
Yeah.
yeah. Um, Yeah, if you had enough evidence, you wouldn't need fear. Like, another analogy that I love giving in that situation is, imagine going to court, over a dispute over land or something, and instead of just showing the judge the deed to the land and the coordinates and everything, you also point a gun at their face and say, if you don't rule in my favor, I'm going to shoot you and your family. Like, why? If you need that to win the case, then obviously you don't have a good case. Otherwise, if you do have a good case, then you're just terrorizing someone for no reason. So why would God point a gun to our heads just to prove that it's real and it wants our attention?
It's even worse. It would be, if you don't do it, then I'm going to slowly roast your family in fire and melt their skin
Yep,
off, and then
yep.
grow their skin back and melt it again.
Yeah. Hassan Adwan, thanks for watching and being here. Says, did you stay up on the
Hey,
night
Hassan.
when it might be Laylat al-Qadr? I spent so many nights hoping to win the lottery.
Me, no. I was definitely a slacker on that front. I would just go to sleep as soon as I could.
Yeah, no, I did. I can't remember exactly. It was like the last 10 nights of Ramadan that it was likely to happen on, and some people
Mhm.
had theories about which specific day, but no one really know. But Laylatul Qadr is this one special night that's خير من ألف شهر, better than 1,000 months. The verse says تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر, and so on. So the angels um, and the spirits, supposedly God, I think. Don't quote me on that, but anyway, God is closer to Earth and closer to us, and you get a lot more, like 1,000 times as many hasanat. If you pray that night, it's like you prayed for 1,000 months or something. So people, towards the end of Ramadan, they work extra hard to stay up that night and pray extra, and it always struck me as so illogical and weird. Like, obviously God can do whatever he wants, but what is the significance of that one night and why make it ambiguous? Like, I get it as an incentive to push people to pray more, but it also seemed kind of silly, especially that part of the concept was, or a similar one is God descends closer, or like to the lowest sky in the last third of the night. And I remember thinking, once I learned a bit more about the solar system, if it's Earth, it's round, and night is just the part where the sun's not reaching for the person who's in that part. Like, it's always night somewhere, 24 hours. There's part of the Earth that's night. Is God just always in the lowest sky? Or did they not understand that it's not a sphere? They thought it was a flat Earth. The answer is the latter.
Yeah. In a way, it's kind of genius. It reminds me just of those, gambling apps or something, or like slot machines where they just dangle this thing to, you'll never know. It could be this one, or join us for the 10-day sweepstakes special, and one of these days will be, the max lotto prize. It
Mhm.
really is no different from that, and they just had that kind of incentive model figured out centuries ago.
And Hassan says that you're a promise that your prayers will definitely be answered.
Definitely. I like that in all caps. Definitely.
But that's the thing that drives me crazy. There is no consistency in Islam, right? Because then you ask, okay, if I pray for something and it doesn't happen that night, does that mean that Allah is not real? They'll say no, because still Allah maybe defers answering it to another time that's better for you, or gives you more good deeds, or will defer it to the day, after the day of judgment in heaven, he'll give you what you wanted. Or sometimes it's just Allah decides whether or not you get it. So which is it? Is it definitely going to be answered, or is it not?
There's always a loophole.
Because I want to be scientific about this. I want to stay up for Laylatul Qadr just to, pray for a bunch of things to kind of have a spreadsheet and figure out, does Allah exist or not? Does he answer prayers or not? I'm not even going to use it for world domination, I promise. I just want to know if Allah is real or not. And maybe, drop some crypto in my Bitcoin wallet or something. Yeah, it's fun to think about these things. By the way, tell me when you gotta go, because I'm good staying for a while, but I know that you gotta.
I'm still good too.
All right. Wait, before I read this, I just want to mention that we have reached the goal.
Oh, we did.
Yeah, we have. So I will be donating $100
Oh,
to Zakat. Well, Zakat. I'll be donating $100 to a good cause.
cat toys, I bet.
No, not to the benefit of anyone in this household. Should I start another goal, or is that pushing it now? Oh, I won't start another goal. Anyway, moving on. Next question. Ismail asks, again, I am curious, again, as in they've asked the question before. I am curious, do you hold a non-theistic moral philosophy that explains where the concepts of bad and good come from, or do you feel them in your heart without clear-cut philosophical reasoning?
That's an excellent question. What I concluded once I left Islam, and this is part of my journey out of leaving Islam, was that good and bad are man-made concepts that can be explained by how our society works and how we've, just developed and grown as a species for however million years or however you want to quantify it. So I would say that you have to look at it from the perspective of what we gain and what we stand to lose from them, and from an accumulation of human wisdom. Because I would say that good and bad doesn't really matter to anything beyond us. Other animals don't care about our concepts of good and bad.
If anything, our concepts of good and bad do not serve other animals in the slightest.
No, definitely not. I mean, we've bred some animals to try and uh, seek our approval and all that, but I'm talking about beyond that. So yeah, that's what I would say. Is I don't think there's something that exists outside of us. I don't think that there's something that we can instinctively just intuit out there in the universe. I think they're really restricted to us and our society and our values.
Right. I agree with that. And it's kind of scary for believers to hear that, because
Very scary.
that's saying the reality is you have no objective moral code. Objective moral codes are a myth, in my opinion. And the way that believers think their religion makes a case for an objective moral code is by claiming that it came from the one and only God. So,
And it's their subjective interpretation
right,
of that
and
objective
it's not
code.
just that. It brings up the question: is like, did this code exist independent of God, and God follows it, or is the code essentially whatever God says is fair? So is the code just whatever God says, or is there a code and God happens to follow it because God is good and commanded and so on? There's no really good answer to that, except from my understanding, every religion that says that God set out a code for us is just a man-made religion that someone claims to have spoken to God sometime a long time ago. And then even then, the code that it gave us is not only subjectively understood, but a lot of it is so outdated it doesn't even apply to us today. Or it's so bad that we have surpassed it in terms of measurements of happiness and well-being and fairness and things of that nature. We can do better than that code already. And it's just funny that imagine a book of law, which if you think of the Quran as a book of law, and in the middle of it, there's some note about how people shouldn't stay too late at Muhammad's place, or like he should marry this woman, or have the right to marry whatever woman he wants. It's obviously not the best code, or not really sanitized enough to be something that is focused on morality. It's just a bunch of ramblings, and people try to make sense of it. So yeah, there is no such thing as objective morality. And if there is, just claiming that you have it because you claim your God wrote it doesn't mean that you do, is how we think about it.
I agree with you 100%. The thing that scares believers, and I completely understand it, is they're worried that things that we value now or condemn now, what if they change because society changes 100 years in the future, 200 years in the future? And the honest reality is that is what will likely happen, and that is what has always happened.
Yeah.
So you can't get out of that by just claiming that your God is transcendent to all of that.
And to answer the original question, do you have non-theistic moral philosophy, or is it felt in your heart without clear-cut philosophical reasoning? I think most people do not follow, clearly a outlined moral philosophy, unless it's the kind of philosophy that's like, let me go ask a sheikh if this is halal or haram. But I mean, outside of that, most people don't sit down and think, well, from a utilitarian point of view, it's this, and from this, it's that. Like, there's always that measurement in your head, and some people think of it differently. Some people do the calculation, some people don't. But for the most part, we do go by feel. Even the religious people. Sometimes something would feel haram, even if you don't know the ruling on it, if it's haram or not, or something feels good to do. So it's a mix of both. But at the end of the day, even after you did the thing that felt good or bad, or didn't do the thing that felt bad, it's good to sit and review and think about it in a bit more organized way, if you can afford the time and the energy to do that. So yeah, I hope that answers that question. And yeah, it always bothers me to see this dichotomy of like, all the women on antidepressants on OnlyFans definitely don't need religion. How do I explain this? We are just essentially descendants of apes that got smart enough to start arguing about things that aren't even in our field of vision. Like, other animals don't usually do that, as far as I'm aware. Their language skills, their cognitive skills, they don't argue usually about big concepts that aren't right in front of them. And what we do is we waste our time trying to fit all of this into one cohesive theory and then argue over it. In reality, people everywhere face problems that are different depending on the life that they're living, and the society that they live in, and their income and all that kind of stuff. So yes, you can point to a particular problem that I'm sure a lot of women in the Middle East don't have OnlyFans, as many women who do otherwise. But then you have men from the Middle East or whatever Muslim country subscribing to the OnlyFans ladies. And also you have a lot of women who suffer in ways like, instead of someone selling pictures of herself with her consent, you have someone who's forced into a marriage that she doesn't want to be in, or someone who's abused, and Islamically it's allowed to happen. So just because you don't have that particular, what you consider to be a problem, doesn't mean that your society doesn't have other problems. It's all a combination of a lot of factors that you don't even realize. And instead of arguing about which one is right, how about you just observe the one around you and try to make it a bit better? That's my approach to it.
I have nothing to add to that. Well said.
I'm very rambly today, so feel free to interrupt at any point. Let's see. What's another question? Do you have another one, or should I find one on the list?
Go ahead.
All right. Let's see. Thoughts on, I guess this is another one of those philosophical questions. That is what free will is for. And I got a question that says, thoughts on free will. Where would our free will come from if not from a series of causal events? Relate that to Islam. I don't know how you want to interpret that, but I guess give your thoughts on, do we or do we not have free will, and what does Islam say about it?
Oh wow, you did not tell me you were going to be talking about free will in this AMA.
I mean, you have a choice not to answer, right?
I would say, yeah, I would say whether there is the God of Islam or not, we don't actually have free will in the sense of being able to choose what we want to do or not, or what we don't want to do. Having a God there doesn't change that or not. So that's pretty much my stance on free will. So that's different from the kind of free will that sometimes people talk about, where if I want to, I can just stand up now and, I don't know, take my shirt off. But I can't decide to not take my shirt off if that's what I deep down want to do, if that makes sense. So if I end up not taking my shirt off, I'm not doing that because that's what I actually really want to do. Does that make sense?
I think I follow.
See, this is what happens when you start talking about free will.
It is a very tricky concept.
Yeah, it is a little bit tricky to get into.
All right.
Can you repeat the full question again?
Okay, let me see if I can quickly find it. Thoughts on free will? Question mark. Where
Mhm.
would our free will come from if not from a series of causal events? So I guess the person is saying, how can we have free will if it's a series of causal events?
Well, I think thank you, Niselio. Uh, well, see, it's still on, so clearly I don't. But what I would add to that is I think there is something to that in the sense of how everything that happens is a series of causal events, and so even when it's something really minor, like why did I just pick up this remote right now and put it down now and not 2 seconds later, 2 seconds earlier,
Mhm.
we don't really know what's going on in those decisions, but they're definitely the result of some kind of process.
I can tell you that I don't believe we have free will. That really depends on how you define free will. Not to pull a Jordan Peterson, but what do you mean by free will?
What do
But
you mean?
yeah, if we're talking about the agency, the uninfluenced agency to make any decision you want, I don't believe that we have that. I believe that everything, to a large extent, at least, if not completely, is a um, has a lot of factors involved that we're not even aware of. Like the one example that always comes to mind is the diet that you eat, which you might argue that it is a choice, but it's also dependent on where you are geographically, how much money you have, convenience, that kind of stuff. But that can affect the chemistry of your brain, or even the amount of testosterone that that your body secretes, that could affect your mood and your behavior and your decisions. There are so many things that you don't choose that are just in your life or happen to you that factor into who you are and the choices that you make, that I think it's impossible to then put a label on all of that and say, but that person chose it out of their free will. And I know that that causes a bit of problems, because if we don't have free will, is anyone really accountable for anything they do? I mean, morally, that's a dubious question. Some people would say yes, some people say no. Like, what if a crazy person is a crazy person? I mean, I don't mean crazy in a derogatory way, but someone who's not in touch with reality whatsoever. Are they accountable for their actions? We give them a pass. We say, well, they pled insanity. But to a larger extent, aren't we all on that spectrum?
Yeah,
I don't even know where I'm going with this.
yeah. I
Point
I
is,
think. Oh, if you have
yeah,
something else
I
to
gotta
add,
summarize this. We have
yep.
to enforce, laws, and we have to hold people accountable, um, because we don't want chaos, and because we want incentive to have, peace and harmony, and we have to enforce that in some way. It doesn't mean that just because we don't have free will, therefore anyone can do whatever they want. But I don't really think that we do have free will.
Very well said. I think we're completely aligned on that. And I think the value from this discussion comes from when we look at things like how do we punish criminals. Uh, I think just again talking about how we need to have some kind of law and order in order to function as a society. For example, if there's someone who's a serial killer and if he's released, he'll keep on killing people, then we have to incarcerate that individual to stop him from doing it. But I think the difference is from how we treat those individuals when they are incarcerated, for example. So if we stop looking at people as, let's say, that person is evil for doing what he did and he needs to suffer for his evil actions, and we start looking at people as, the consequences of of their environment and all the things that led them to this point in their lives, we can focus more on rehabilitation than punishment when we look at each other in that kind of way. So that's where the value of it comes from, in how we treat each other. We still have to impose restrictions, but we don't have to demonize people or look at people as evil incarnate because of their decisions.
And also understanding the factors, or studying the factors that are behind, certain archetypes, I guess, in psychology, can be useful for preventing that from happening in the future, or spotting it
Precisely.
before it happens. If there's a trend, if you see a trend in the how people who are abused, for example, and I'm just making this up, don't quote me, but let's say people who are abused have a tendency to do X or Y, and that is a trend. How can you still think that there is free will, but just by coincidence a lot of people who experience the same thing are behaving in a similar way? There's obviously, stuff that is out of our control. Otherwise, there will be a distribution that is not uniform in any way whatsoever. But if we can study that, then we can influence that in a good way for the future generations, if not rehabilitate the person who's, suffering from it now or inflicting suffering on others. So unfortunately, though, it doesn't, all of that doesn't vibe with a religious mind sometimes, because the answers are supposed to be simple and to the point. Yes, we have. No, we don't. Yes, we have. Why? Because God said so. And when you even look at, if you want to make it compatible with Islam, how can we have free will when there are hadiths that explicitly say Allah decides everything before you're even in the womb, before your soul is
Oh,
put in the womb?
so many contradictions there. I remember that really confused me when I was starting to question Islam, because you can kind of hear arguments for both.
Yeah. And again, it's the inconsistency that drives me nuts. There are a lot of issues that Islam is like both ways on, and depending on who you're arguing and what purposes they're arguing for, or what side they're arguing for, they'll pull a relevant hadith or verse to make their case. But they could just be arguing against each other. So you'll have Muslims that say there is no free will, Muslims that say there is free will, but also God knows everything that's going to happen and he doesn't influence it, which is a concept that's very hard for me to swallow or believe, that God would plan everything, God would write it down, God knows what's going to happen, but also it's free will. So it really depends on who you ask. I have never been able to make free will and predetermination or predestination compatible. It's either
Yeah,
one or the other.
it's either one or the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like for example, I'm really craving this chocolate bar here that I have right next to me. Tony's Chocolate is a proud sponsor of my channel. Kidding, they're not. But why am I not having it, even though I'm craving it?
Mhm.
I don't know, because there's other times where I'm craving it and I would have it.
But do you even choose to crave it or not to crave it?
No,
Like
not
what
really.
kind? Is it dark chocolate? Is it milk chocolate?
It's actually dark chocolate with sea salt.
Okay, say I don't like dark chocolate very much. I am less likely to choose to buy dark chocolate because I don't like it and I didn't choose not to like it. So there's some degree of influence that's beyond my control. I can
Yeah.
still, despite not liking dark chocolate, go buy dark chocolate, but I'm probably not going to. And that seems like a silly analogy or example, but extend that to everything: your political opinions, your religious
Mhm.
opinions. All of that, to some extent, was influenced into you one way or another, and sometimes you don't even know why you have that belief. So it's good to think about why you believe what you believe and why you behave the way that you behave.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and thank you so much, Ferry, for gifting a bunch of memberships. That's so
Whoa.
nice of you. For people who don't know, I don't really know what the algorithm is for choosing which people get the membership. Maybe it's the more you participate, the more likely you are to get the gift. But the person giving the gifts doesn't really get to choose, and I don't get to choose. So a bunch of people are now members, whether or not they like the channel. But welcome. I hope you subscribe as well. Like and subscribe,
Very
everyone.
nice.
Check out Secular Spirits channel too. It's going to be in the description. We're not done yet, but I just wanted to mention that. And if you just joined, if you got a membership, link her YouTube channel to your Discord account, and you might be able to join the Discord server. And yeah, welcome to the community.
Gerwalk says, "Hi, hey,
Mhm.
Gerwalk. Not liking dark chocolate is purely rational."
I mean, that's like your opinion, man. Lissa, thank you again for the super chat. Amazing. Lissa says, genuinely curious, are you now saying you're an evolutionist? You just mentioned that we are descendants of apes. That is evolution. Just trying to understand. What do you think about that whole evolution thing?
The whole evolution thing they're trying to teach our kids.
Yeah.
How dare they? I don't know if there's a specific definition or connotation to an evolutionist, but I would say I generally accept the theory of evolution, and that we are evolved from apes. Yeah.
So for me, there's a lot of evidence, including fossils, that show the steps between a species, going from this to that over time. And I don't pretend to know everything there is to know about these fields of science or science in general, but I know enough that I struggle to believe that there's any reason there's an agenda or a misunderstanding that is that large of a scale that a bunch of scientists independently would verify and check and agree that that is a concept, that there is at least adaptation. So when I was a Muslim, I was taught by my biology teacher, as Muslims, we believe in maybe like adaptation, but not evolution, which is a species gradually changing, but we don't believe that a species turns into a different species.
So a template was installed, and then all those templates can vary, but the templates were always there,
Yeah,
essentially.
that God created, like creationism at the same time, that God created a bunch of different animals, and then they might have changed over the years, or they adapt to their environment over the generations, which is the mechanism that evolution works by, if I understand correctly. And then selectively, whether or not that adaptation is good for them is the gene that remains and perpetuates on in future generations. So as a concept, it seems to make sense. I don't know. The part that I struggle with is the beginning. How did life start from non-organic material? And there are theories about that, but no one has been able to replicate it yet. I don't know if they will in my lifetime, but I'm curious about it. But ever since life began, however it began, if there was a particular beginning to it, it makes sense that things have been evolving. And DNA, and like there are things that even the person asking the question, say you're not an evolution believer, there are things that you benefit from today, like vaccines, medications, and so on, that rely on the knowledge that that the people who believe in evolution or have deduced that evolution is real have gotten from studying DNA and the similarities and the percentage of DNA that we have in common with other species and so on. So the same principles are already in practice that you're using when you take medication, when you take vaccines, and so on, or when someone's treating your illness. So it's not that far fetched, and there's no conspiracy to like make evolution a thing when it's not a thing. So I conclude so far that evolution is real. I just don't know how everything began. That's the part that I struggle with. Ahmed says the guy on the right was never a Muslim, just acting for attention. How many rak'ahs in what was it? How many rak'ahs in wudu?
How many surahs in a rak'ah?
How many surahs in rak'ah? How many sujood in wudu? um, Let's see. And I mean, we joke, but I just want you to be aware that this is a common tactic that not just Muslims sometimes unknowingly participate in, but people who have, people of different religions and high control groups, they look at the outsiders, the people who left, and they say, that person was never in our group to begin with. They're faking it for attention, or this person never quite understood it, and that's why they left, and so on. So that's not to say that Muslims don't do it more than other groups. Maybe they do. But because it's so common, maybe it's a chance for a believer to think, wait, if I do this about my religion and they do this about their religion, could we both be falling for the same,
Mhm.
what's like conversation ending, thought stopping cliche here? Like, is this just a way to get me to stop thinking about what he's saying? Because I've been trained to think that there's a conspiracy against us, or that people pretend to be. But of course, there are people who pretend to be, ex-Muslim, and we've seen a bunch of those, especially like theists of other religions, for ulterior motives, because they want to make, their religion look better than Islam. Um, and that really hurts us and our credibility, because we're just trying to represent ourselves here. But we don't have to like prove ourselves to every person who doesn't believe us. We're just going to keep doing our thing, right?
Yeah. And once I revert back to Islam, like maybe around next year, you'll see how all these Muslims will be like, look, we brought back our Muslim brother. He left Islam, but he's back now because he sees the truth.
Yeah. I don't know what to say. I believe that he was a Muslim, but if we're gonna have a competition, were you as much of a Muslim as I were? I don't know about that. I feel like I was more of a practicing Muslim than you. That
Oh,
doesn't mean
you?
that, yeah.
You? Oh, definitely. I think that's clear. Yeah.
But I don't say, I say that jokingly. I don't believe that you need to prove your Muslimness or ex-Muslimness to anyone, or unless you were someone who practiced very much all the time, you have no right to talk about the religion. That's BS. And it still affects you whether or not, you
Oh, yeah.
practice a lot or
Exactly.
not. Um,
Great
but yeah,
point. Yeah.
just wanted to mention that.
Thank you for the lovely comment, Ahmed.
Yeah. And Lissa, again, amazing super chats. Thank you so much. Maybe I'm going to have to raise the donation amount that I'll be giving. Yeah, that memberships apparently are given to random people. I don't think it's supposed to give it to people who already have memberships, but maybe I'm wrong. I hope that it's just new people who got them, but thank you for being so generous. Another question. I have a spicy question that has to do with topics that have nothing to do with Ramadan, how willing are you to take one before we go? Or like,
Let's do it. Let's do it.
okay, but first we'll take this one.
Spiciness.
Zakaria says, something that really made me firmly believe that there is an afterlife is the unfair nature of the world. I still cannot accept there will be no judgment. What do you think?
That was one of the big ones for me. When I was starting to question Islam, is letting go of this belief that there's going to be some kind of force that rectifies all the wrongs and the injustices in the world. But just because something feels wrong, like it feels so bad to think that, someone being murdered and the criminal and the murderer gets away with it, things like that, just because they're bad doesn't make it true that there's something out there that will pass on perfect judgment on everything. I remember this was years after I left Islam. I was having a conversation with my mother, and I don't know how the subject came up, but we were talking about how she raised me as a Muslim and what her motivation was, even though she had questions about the faith herself, which she withheld from me. And one of the things she told me was that she felt that I was too young to see that there was no justice in the universe. And that's something that's tough to accept, whatever age you are, especially if you've gone through suffering in life. Just because something is bad doesn't mean we automatically revert to some kind of comforting belief about it.
I think the reason, Zakaria, that you might be thinking this way is because you grew up with the understanding that the world is fair, right? Even the unfairness that you see in front of you is still explainable within the model, right, of your beliefs, which is God lets it happen right now. Sometimes he intervenes, sometimes he doesn't. But at the end, it will all be fair. After we die, God's gonna, give the people who deserve hasanat their hasanat, people who deserve sayyat their sayyat, and so on. But even that model is not really fair when you think about it, because a lot of it depends on not just what good you did or what your intention was or what bad things you did. It's also whether or not you believe in Islam. So, we could talk about this for a long time, but generally, if you're someone who doesn't believe in Islam and you know Islam exists and you heard the pitch and you just don't believe it, no amount of good deeds would help you, and you'll go to hell, the same hell, maybe not the same degree, but does it really matter? The same eternal hell as the Hitlers of the world, that you think it's unfair that they'll get away with it, or the Netanyahus of the world or whatever. You think it's really unfair that those people will die and nothing will happen to them and they got away with a lot of bad things. The answer is yes, it is unfair. So let's try our best to make justice happen in this world, because as far as we know, there's nothing afterwards to balance the scales. And also, someone suffering and then God giving them points in the afterlife doesn't really cancel out anything, unless also God removes your memory of the trauma that you went through and changes your personality so that it's almost like it never happened. But if that's how
the
it works,
argument I've heard is that when you reach the afterlife, it doesn't matter to you anymore.
right?
Yeah.
But there's still a lot of holes in that model that you've been taught. But anyway, when you don't have that anymore, the alternative is very, very bleak, because you never learn to accept that the world is unfair, but that's not the end of the world. That's not a depressing answer, and that means you should just not do anything because the world is unfair. But you just try to make it more fair or better as much as you can, because that's the only thing you can do. I think that is more helpful than hoping for a God that evens the scales at the end. And if there is such a God, and maybe it's going to pick up the slack, the things that we couldn't fix, somehow God's going to make it fair. But it doesn't hurt to do your best in this life.
Yeah. And I've talked about this before on my channel. I did a video specifically addressing this question. And I always remember this one comment I got, and it was from, I think it was an older woman, and she was saying, well, you can say that because you're young, you've got your health, you live in a safe country, but what about the people who aren't as fortunate, who have maybe a debilitating disease, who have lost loved ones, who aren't in a good, stable country where they can just walk out in the streets in safety? What would you say to that kind of concern?
That it's easy for me to say because I have it easy.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah. Of course, I have it easier than a lot of other people. I don't deny that, but it's not like I have it perfect. There's still suffering, and from my experience, at least, the human psyche is kind of like a liquid, or sorry, like a gas that fills the chamber that it's in. So even if a lot of things in your life are going great and you're not, broke or without a home or anything like that, your suffering tends to fill the gaps that you have and make you feel as if you're suffering a lot. And the other way around too. If you're in dire circumstances, in a war zone or something, you sometimes the brain's able to normalize that somehow, and then you still find happiness in the little things. And I'm not saying we're equally suffering or anything, but I'm saying your perception of it is always biased, and you still perceive suffering more than it actually is, even if you're, if you're privileged. So to some extent, I suffer, and I'm sure I would struggle with it more if I was suffering more, but it doesn't change the reality of it. I think if I started suffering more going forward, I can't see myself just believing in God just because I need that hope. Once you see it a certain way, it's hard to unsee it.
Yeah,
So,
I would add that you have to, I think if you're leaning more into belief or faith because you're going through tough times and suffering, it's completely understandable.
mhm,
But I think that's when you should be questioning it more, because you are leaning into it more when you're in this extreme circumstance and really in need of support. I don't think that amplifies it, if anything. Oh, sorry, amplifies the justification for it. I think that actually
mm,
weakens it.
yeah. And to echo this comment by Ahsan, what
Exactly.
obligation does the universe have to make things fair? But even that question, assumes that the universe is an entity with a will
Yeah.
and so on. We don't know if there's anything with a will out there or a larger plan, but even if there were, there is no necessity that that thing is enforcing fairness. It could just be a giant sandbox experiment, and just letting the factors loose and see what happens. We have no way of telling. Um, so yeah, it might be a bit bleak to see it that way, but you get used to it and you find happiness. Like I am way less depressed now than I was when I was trying to force a belief system and a justice system that didn't seem believable or just. That caused more suffering for me than believing that things are what they are and I am the one trying to find meaning in them.
Hmm. And just to uh, amplify something you mentioned earlier, I think when you look at this alternative that there's a God who will dispense perfect justice, it's kind of an absurdly simplistic way of looking at it, because if you really break it down, it makes no sense. There's so many things in life and existence that are complicated. They have a lot of nuances. They aren't black and white. They're gray. And how would a God mete out justice when you think about all the possible complexities that happen from our actions? It's easy to just say, well, Allah knows best. He'll figure out. Of course, He knows. But it would be a nightmare. There would be so many things that would be. How do you even quantify them? And that's something that I always questioned as well in that phase where I was questioning Islam.
I think that one is easier to stomach because it's just God handles everything.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, like
Don't
if you
worry about
believe,
it.
yeah, yeah, and if we're talking about a God with infinite resources and infinite everything, then it's like the biggest supercomputer to ever exist. It can handle all that many variables. I'm sure it can. My problem wasn't believing that God can. It's just that it seems like God was missing a bunch of factors already that I can identify. And if that's the case, then what else is this model of God missing? So I don't think that God exists and God is flawed in its judgment. I'm saying this description seems to describe a very flawed judgment and a flawed God. And if God is perfect, then by definition, this is not God, you know? So it was kind of a self, I don't know, self debunking definition where you have to present God as biased and angry and having big feelings about you not believing, but at the same time, supposedly he understands all the factors that led someone to not believe. So which is it? And as Hassan al said earlier, it seems like Allah and God in general in these religions doesn't understand the human condition or the human psyche. If he did, he wouldn't feel personally about it. He wouldn't be upset by it. Um, the man said thinks a knowing all-knowing God has the same brain as he does. The arrogance is astounding. The irony of this, though, right? That it's more arrogant to assume that God thinks like a big egotistical king who gets upset when you don't worship it and when you acknowledge other kings and shirk and so on. That is more arrogant than to think, I don't know what God would be like, but I assume be better than this.
Yo, and by the way, Ahmed, why are you picking on me? uh,
Yeah.
if anything, you're giving me more of that tension I'm seeking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Please focus your attention here on me.
yeah,
Not this
yeah,
guy. He's not really a true Muslim.
yeah.
So
And I always
yeah.
think about scenarios like, let's say there's a father who's super strict, and like, let's say he has a son and he beats his son, and he's super strict and withholding affection from him, but he does it actually out of love because he wants to harden his son and prepare him for the rigors of adult life. How would that kind of thing, where you could say, well, this was child abuse, there's child abuse happening from one perspective, but from another perspective, the father's perspective, he's doing this out of love, and maybe you could argue that the son benefited from it in the long run. He became a warrior who fought bravely, and so it just becomes more and more mired in all that complexity. So I don't know how God would do it, but like Ahmed was saying, he does not have my puny brain, so I'm sure he has it all figured out.
Again, and my objection isn't that there's no possible God that could do all of this calculation. By definition, if it is infinite, then yes. But again, all of this is like discussing what is possible, what is not possible. None of it is discussing what is actually the case and what is evidently true. And I find that with Islam, at least, and probably other religions, it's usually the case that they're making is, wouldn't it be this way? Wouldn't it, like, isn't the only conclusion that there is a God and his name is Allah?
Mm.
Isn't it crazy to think otherwise? But it's never, this is the proof that this is the way things are. It's always, wouldn't it be crazy if it wasn't? Why are we going in circles around proving it? Why not prove it? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Let's see. There's still a bunch of questions. So Skyman, thank you for the super chat, says, just wondering, have you seen any of Abu Zakaria's books or videos on his channel? Many Prophets, One Message. Have you seen his video, The Quran and the Secrets of Egypt? Do so.
no,
Yeah.
I have not, but I will subscribe right now just so I can find it.
Please remind me if when you watch it, because sounds interesting. I haven't, but I'll give it a look.
Many Prophets, One Message.
Fadi, thank you for the super chat. Says, my Ramadan question, any females here that had to pretend to fast even when you were on your period? Because even acknowledging that is somehow just shameful and needs to be hidden. Ooh, that's a question not for us, I guess, but for the people in the audience. So do let us know. But it's not the first time I've heard that periods are, it's almost an acknowledgement that a woman has a vagina, and acknowledging a woman's vagina or talking about genitals or an acknowledgement that they have genitals is a big no-no in a lot of subcultures, I guess, in Islam. So sometimes I've heard this so many times before, a girl would be shamed for mentioning in front of her father or brother that she's on her period, because that's aib. Like, that's bad manners. You can't say that you're on your period in front of your male family members. Why? Like, there's a high sensitivity to even the mention of not even sex, but the genitals in a way. Like, maybe they're scared that's going to induce some lustful thoughts into these men. It's this hyper paranoia and sensitivity to sex. So in a similar vein, it's very believable, I've heard this before, that a woman would be ashamed to tell people she's on her period, so she would fast, because she doesn't want to say, even though Islamically she's not supposed to, she doesn't want to say I'm on my period, because that is shameful and embarrassing. And sometimes people would even doubt her, be like, I've heard stories of teachers and women in position of authorities over girls asking them to prove that they're on their period so they could skip fasting, because they're assuming that the girl is lying so she could get out of fasting. So I totally believe that. There are comments that say they relate to that. And I know the religious reaction is usually, that's not real Islam. That's not what Islam says. That's, it's not Islam's problem. It's a human problem. But again, I talk about trends, right? When you create an environment and rules that tend to have that as a consequence, then in a way it is caused by that religious, mindset or that ideology. And God should have seen it coming. God should have made it extra clear that don't be too paranoid. Don't be ashamed to mention that you're on your period. You can skip fasting. Don't let anyone shame you into it, not even your, religious teacher. But God neglected to do that. That's what I think. Fari says, I had to wake up for Fajr even when on my period because my dad couldn't be told that she was on her period, and she hated that so much. Yeah.
Ugh, that's terrible.
Hassan says, at the Islamic school I taught, there were a lot of girls suddenly getting periods during Ramadan. Yeah,
Oh,
because
so it's kind of like getting out of gym class in a way.
right. And that is used as justification for like women to kind of police it and inspect the girls to make sure they're not lying. But again, we're reminded of how in Islam, nothing is truly a choice. Like they say, you have the choice to wear the hijab, you have the choice to fast or not. But no, you don't. People pressure you into it. And if you don't, you're told that God's going to torture you for it. It's not really a choice, is it?
Yeah, you have a choice, but you have pretty heavy consequences for those choices.
Ahmed says, yes, let's have an environment, sarcastically, where we talk about vaginas and penises with family members.
No, we should not talk about anything sexuality related and just suppress it. That's a better remedy.
No one's saying you should discuss your sex life with your sister, for example. But if she says, I'm on my period, I have a headache, get out of my face. What's the harm in that? Or for whatever reason, like what is so bad about that? Acknowledging that she has a vagina. Like we can relate to this from an Arab culture point of view. Sometimes it's an insult just to say your mom's vagina in Arabic. That's the whole insult. It's your mom's vagina. It's like saying your dad's balls. There's no insult there, right? In English, there's no insult. But in Arabic, it's like, I mentioned your mom's vagina, and that is, I'm not even supposed to think about it.
Mentioned the unmentionable.
Yeah. And I'm mentioning it right now. What if I'm thinking about it? Doesn't that piss you off? And it's the whole like hyper paranoia and macho-ness of like, I'm not a youth, so I can't allow you to say that. But all of our mothers have vaginas. That's where we came from. So
Whoa, easy there.
Yeah, I don't
Don't
know.
talk about my mother that way.
I'm sorry to your mother, but yeah, the C word or the D word are different because you can call someone a prick as an insult, but it's not the same as saying your dad's
No.
prick, and that should piss you off that I acknowledged your dad as a prick. Yeah, this kind of derailed a little bit, but that's what happens. This is funny. I have a challenge. Take your mask off, and I will believe you were ever a Muslim, Apostle Aladdin. How are you going to believe that? Like, if I take it off, I could still be faking it, right?
You'll have the infamous Islamic nose.
Is
Everyone
that a
knows.
thing? That's not
No.
a thing.
No, it's not.
You're making stuff up. Okay, I get this. For some reason, people have been asking me something along the lines of, let me find the comment. Kat says, I know you said you wouldn't react to AP anymore, but I feel like someone should once again. And I'm curious to know where this particular commenter is coming from. What do you mean react to? I have something in mind, but I want to know which one you mean. Because there's a couple of things that, again, I don't want to particularly talk about this person, but it is the person that's talking about these things. There was this conversion to Christianity, or him teasing that he's converting to Christianity, that's been going on for a while now. And there's his undying support for everything that any Israeli ever does. And Trump also, apparently, huge fan of Trump. And this all comes to mind because recently, did you see that video that Trump posted of Gaza, like the AI video?
No. Oh, the
I
last
sent
I
it to
heard
you.
was the Riviera. I want to turn to the Riviera of the Middle East
Yeah,
video
it's
thing.
this bizarre AI video that Trump himself posted of like Gaza and how the US is going to turn it into some kind of, I don't know, it doesn't make it clear, but like progress, which is basically the US invading Gaza and colonizing it. It's so weird. And I'm curious to know what AP would think of that. But anyway, I think people are generally asking about his conversion to Islam. Apparently incoming conversion and begging for money to go on trips and such. Let me say asking for money, but the commenter said begging for money to go on trips. Do you have any thoughts on, people converting from Islam to Christianity in general?
Well, I did. I think it was about a year ago. I did this whole video. The title was kind of clickbaity. Is AP Apostate Prophet a secret Christian? And I just looked at all of these instances where my main point was Apostate Prophet is so critical of Islam for many valid reasons, I would say, and yet he would spend a lot of his time doing a lot of videos with someone who was preaching Christianity, and it didn't make sense to me because Christianity has many of the same problems and toxic teachings of Islam. And so, in a broad sense, when someone like, for example, Ayan Hirsi Ali, who left Islam, became an atheist, and then converted to Christianity, I think there's a big problem there that they're either ignoring or not addressing properly, because a lot of the issues that they suffered from because they were when they were Muslim are things that also exist in Christianity. So, depending on how the person navigates that, I think there's potential for some problems or a lot of problems.
Mhm. I see that generally there's an accusation in general that anything critical of Islam has some Christian undertones to it. Like we hear that a lot in the Middle East, that if they see someone with my or your complexion, they're always assuming, "Why are you doing this? Are you a Christian?" Right? Because there's this Christianity versus Islam thing going on, and also in the West now that's going on, and on YouTube too. And so even if you and I say we're not Christian, the archetype that keeps getting confirmed is, famous ex-Muslim becomes a Christian. And why that is, there are a bunch of reasons why, but I explicitly want to listen to their reasoning. And when what's her name, Ayan Hirsi Ali, wrote an article about why she converted to Christianity, mostly the conclusion, and correct me if I'm wrong, was political reasons, because no one's fighting against Islamic extremism, and Christianity is where you find allies. And
Yeah,
I
and
think this,
atheism isn't strong enough to do it. Yeah.
yeah, and atheism is not united. It's not really organized in any way. So in that sense, you need an organized group of people, an organized front. I don't agree with that, because I don't think, I mean, I agree with the sentiment that atheism is not a group. You're not going to find support just because you're an atheist. You have to build your own community and find causes, and put in a lot of work to get attention for them. You can't just hijack a pre-existing structure, say Christianity, to then support your causes, because not only will maybe your causes are the same, maybe your end goal is the same. I don't think so, but maybe for Ayan and the Christians around her, they are the same. But how to get there and what to do after you get there, or other goals, might not be the same at all. So unless you want to take on everything that they believe and everything that they stand for, and in a way almost sell your soul and not really have a different direction than what they you know kind of dictate that you should have, even if not explicitly, but what they want to hear, so that you don't lose their support, it's a very limiting thing. But at the same time, it comes with a lot of resources that you would otherwise not have access to. It's no secret that you don't get that much funding just as an non-religious ex-Muslim to fight any causes that are either awareness or fighting against Islam or helping people who left Islam. None of that gets you money on its own. But when you combine it with, a population that's already willing to donate for what they think is a religious cause, they view your cause as a religious cause, then fighting Islam becomes a wholly Christian cause, for example. And therefore, they're more likely to give money, because they're not doing it to help an ex-Muslim as much as they're doing it to help, fight against Islam, or help, spread Christianity or something. So I understand why it happens. I don't think that's ever going to happen to me or you, I would assume, because
No, I doubt it.
yeah, some people do convert because they're convinced of the other religion. In that case, I find it questionable, because there are a lot of commonalities between the two religions, and I think it just boils down to Muhammad is not a very PR friendly figure compared to Jesus. So if you're just judging by how Muhammad is as a man and how Jesus is as a man, it's easy to think Muhammad gives me the creeps, so I'm not going to follow Islam, but Jesus seems like a good guy, so I'm going to follow Christianity. But if you look at they're gods, and Jesus is an extension of God. It's the Holy Trinity. So there are a lot of abhorrent things and opinions that the God of Christianity also has and perpetuates. So it's not really a stable position, in my opinion. But to each their own, right? At the end of the day, it's just that the only reason we feel like we should comment on it, or I can speak for myself, is because I keep getting asked that question all the time by ex-Muslims and Muslims and Christians. Like, why is there that link? Why do some ex-Muslims convert to Christianity? And I guess I hope that answers that. But yeah, I wish him luck on his journey forward as a Christian. I don't think he explicitly said that he's a Christian, but
No.
he's been milking that teaser for a few months
Yeah,
now, I think.
it has been teased for a while. In the latest video, I did watch it. He talked about how he went to a church and connected emotionally with the rituals happening there. His wife is a Christian. I think she recently converted, or relatively
Mhm.
recently converted, and he's talked several times about how he felt something when he went to Jerusalem and he went to the Western Wall. And so, yeah, who knows? I think for a lot of people, it's a lot of ex-Muslims, they're drawn to it for the same reasons why they were people are drawn to Islam. You get community, you get this life philosophy, you get this meaning, this message of love and a hope for an afterlife, and a hope for something that addresses the suffering in life. And I don't think that goes away once you leave Islam. A lot of people want those things even after they leave.
Right. And again, it's hard to know why a particular person has a certain belief or adopts a certain belief. It's best to ask them, right? And
Yeah.
they should explain. Um, some people, it benefits them to be a Christian, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that is why they converted to Christianity. Maybe they do have other reasons than it actually works, business wise. So yeah, I'm curious to hear. I don't know if he's really explicitly said that he's a Christian or what convinced him to be a Christian, but if I was listening to any person talk about how they got a feeling and they became Muslim, or they felt something and they became Christian or Hindu or whatever, I wouldn't take that to, really sway me in any direction. And I would expect better from someone who, you know, built his whole brand on thinking critically to some extent about his beliefs. So there's a bit higher of a standard than just someone giving their testimony that I felt the presence of Jesus and now I'm a Christian. But he would laugh about that kind of thing, a Muslim saying it, right? So I have high expectations. Let's see if they're fulfilled.
Yeah. And by the way, while we were talking, I did look up the AI generated Gaza video that Trump posted. Is this the one where there's like a golden statue of Trump somewhere there, and he's at a pool next to Netanyahu, and they're both just in swimming trunks? Is that it?
I wouldn't be surprised if a random follower on Twitter just made this and sent it to him, and he was like, I'm
I
gonna put
love
this
it.
on my Twitter." Yeah, I would
I
not be
love it.
surprised. There's a lot of weird stuff in there. But
Looks
it
like
ends up being
Elon
funny.
Musk is in it as well.
Of course, how could he not? That's the holy trinity for Trump supporters: Trump, Netanyahu, and Elon Musk.
Yeah. The most fascinating thing to me is the belly dancers with beards.
I saw that someone was pointing that.
Fascinating,
Yeah,
fascinating.
it's AI slop, right? It's AI slop. It's not even like well thought out, well edited, combination of clips that used AI to make them. It's just random crap, and it angers me really that again, there's a certain pipeline that I don't completely understand, but leaving Islam and being so angry and resentful that you essentially look for what is the opposing side, what is the furthest away from Islam, and then you have like extremely right-wing politics and easily swayed Trump support for Trump. I don't need to name names, but you know who I'm talking about. There are a bunch of ex-Muslims who think Trump is great, and regardless of your politics, like what? How you knew that if you fell for one con man in your life and you know how to get out of that, how are you falling for another con man? It just makes no sense. Um, yeah,
Yeah, no, well said. And with the German election that was recent, I know that apostate prophet he said something along the lines of, if you don't vote for this far right party that was running in Germany, then you're an idiot. Specifically because they're really targeting getting rid of illegal immigrants and I think minimizing Muslim immigrants in Germany. That kind of attitude is disconcerting too, because when you look into a lot of these far right parties that are prominent in Europe, is it really the case that their target is only Muslims, or is it people from, a non-white background as well? And people like apostate prophet fall into that category. So in a sense, there's like a little element of, the friend of enemy of my enemy is my friend, but when you might potentially be a target for them too, it's really concerning.
Yeah, it's again, people like sometimes people think that commenting on this, like us, talking and passing about this, is some kind of targeted attack or hate or something. But we're allowed to have opinions about things that are happening in our sphere, and commentary about Islam. We're in the same sphere in a way as those people. So if we don't really mention it at all, it almost seems like we're complicit in a sense, or like there's something we're avoiding, like the elephant in the room, and no, I don't avoid these topics. I give my opinions on them. Like I wanted to point out, since we're talking about this, I don't really watch this channel much, but someone pointed this out to me, channel called Ex-Muslim Chronicles. I'm assuming they're Christian or something because of, there's a post here where they talk about how Christianity has evolved so much towards the better that it became this pillar of successful Western free nations. I don't know if I agree with that, but they can have that opinion. This is the part that really confused me. Honestly, every Palestinian supporter in the West is that. And again, not to make this about whataboutism or something, but there are people doing the actual Nazi salutes right now. And the person who made this post really thought that the closest thing to a Nazi is someone who supports Palestinians' right to exist, not people doing Nazi salutes. Like it's almost an archetype of a person who has a set of opinions. And I'm here to tell you, you don't have to fall into a particular group just because you left Islam. So don't fall into that trap. Don't just then find your favorite ex-Muslim YouTuber or whatever and just adopt every opinion that they have. Not even me or this guy. So, there are some stupid takes that I've seen from some ex-Muslims. I can make a whole video about the dumbest takes, but then it'll be viewed as like Aladdin's coming for everyone. Like, oh my
He's
God.
coming. He's coming.
I can't shut up once I start talking. For example, Yasmin Muhammad one time made a post about this. There was this argument about an athlete. I can't remember if it was an Algerian.
Oh,
athlete.
the Algerian one. Yeah. I remember that.
An Algerian women's athlete, and there was rumors from loosely I could say like the right wing in the US that this is a trans athlete, and this was actually a man that became a woman, and therefore it's not fair, and so on. And this whole like trans in sports debate, I don't mean to, I'm not here to say that trans lives don't matter, like trans athletes don't matter, but people amplify it so much that it's a distraction from talking about other things. They make it seem like this is what's holding us all back. This is the real problem. There's a conspiracy here. But anyway, her silly take was that because the coach was carrying her on his shoulders, like a Muslim would never do that with a woman. Therefore, they're acknowledging that she's a man. What a dumb take that is.
It was absurd, ridiculous.
Like
I would actually use the word embarrassing.
it is embarrassing. And again, this is not about a particular person, but it seems like there's this need to adopt whatever the whole group thinks. And I'm not saying that's how all ex-Muslims think, but the ones that find shelter in certain communities of, certain influence, whatever that might be, tend to just go with the crowd and take whatever opinions they have, to the point that she's trying to use her expertise or experience with Islam to relate how this person is definitely a trans athlete, as if like she knows that Muslims generally don't really accept trans people. So to think that there's a conspiracy on the Algerian team to sneak in a trans person, it's insane. But yeah. Anyway, let's take a couple more questions about Ramadan before we go. Um, Lily asks, it's not really a question about Ramadan, but we're getting there. Lily asks, the question is for both of you. Do you think you'll ever stop making content about Islam? These days, I find myself growing tired of talking about it. Do you feel that way too sometimes?
All the time.
Yeah.
There is an element of it, and this is I've come to realize that this is an aspect of just being a content creator on any subject where you inevitably repeat yourself because that's the way it is, and when you're in a niche, there repetition is unavoidable. And one of the decisions I made when I started this YouTube channel, which is an offshoot of my leaving Islam social media, was uh, that I would talk about organized religion in general, and beyond that, just our attempts to find meaning and purpose in life. So I intentionally designed it to be broader beyond just Islam, which I think has personally helped me in not just being dialed in on what can end up becoming very tedious, just talking about Islam.
Yeah. I get exhausted often, but unfortunately, the algorithm hates when you don't post. So it's this race. It's this constant anxiety of like, I got to be productive. I got to be creative. But also, I don't want to think about this topic for a second longer than I need to. Because sometimes I'd be like, 9 to 5 over. I'm not doing the channel stuff anymore. And then I'm scrolling on Instagram, my private account, and I see reminders of Islam or something related to it. And comments by Muslims being a bit insufferable towards the person making the video, and it bothers me. And then I have to go to work the next day, do the same thing all over again. So it is exhausting. In my personal life, if I wasn't doing this on YouTube, if I wasn't doing this, this job, I would probably not want to listen to any more videos about the topic for a while, at least till something happens or it's more relevant to my life, or I feel the need to like come back and help maybe. But when it's constantly something that I have to do, it is exhausting. So I try to take breaks, but at the same time, I gotta keep it going for the algorithm. So long-term plans, I like YouTube's is a means to an end for me. The work behind this is what matters. It's just that YouTube is the medium for it. If I can find a better way to reach more people, then I will stop doing YouTube. But so far, that is the best way to reach this number of people. And I have plans that I don't know if I'll share yet till they're finalized to kind of take this to the next level or help in different ways. So that's all in the future. But yeah, it does get exhausting sometimes.
Yeah, I
And
can
yeah.
relate.
And that's why a lot of people who are, who make content about Islam or leaving Islam and so on, they do it for a while, they burn out, they stop, and and that's understandable because no one should be expected to keep this up forever. Because personally, your own passion for it kind of dies away, and the more that you've dealt with the problems that Islam imposes on you and your life, the less you need to talk about it. But I still care for people, and even if it doesn't affect me all the time, I know that it affects a lot of people. And the more that I see people making content similar to mine, or things that resonate with me, the more I feel like it's not my job anymore, or it doesn't have to be
Mhm.
my job. So someday, I'll feel like there's plenty of people doing this that I am not needed at all.
Well, one thing I was considering, maybe you could take this up too, was uh, to one day pass on the mantle of secular spirit to someone else, to bestow the title to a new secular spirit the second.
I wouldn't do that because I mean, on one hand, it's great marketing, and everyone can be an Aladdin, just wear a black mask and a black cap, and so on. Anyone can be Aladdin for Halloween even. But I also want people to like
Merch
be
coming
themselves.
soon. Your
Yeah,
Apostle Aladdin
Aladdin
Halloween
starter
costume.
kit. Yeah. Um, but I want people to be themselves and express themselves, not as as another Aladdin. Um, but you know, still, if you want to copy me, go for it. I wouldn't mind. Um, let's see. There's a bunch of comments. You got to go, or are you still good?
I've got, let's say, 10 more minutes.
All right. Depending on how it goes, I might stay a bit longer than that once you got to go, but no pressure to continue. Um, Ahmed says, look at how loving and understanding he is to that person. I'm assuming we're talking about AP. Just because he's ex-Muslim, even though he disagrees with him. Do you have thoughts, or should I share mine?
I mean, I'll just say it is a bit frustrating when people make these snap judgments about you, or maybe this person has seen a lot of your videos or my videos, but if you watch our content, we try to be understanding and empathetic with Muslims or anyone we're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say. It's funny, I hear that comment the other way around too. I hear people say, look at how nice he's being or empathetic
To the
he's being
Muslims,
when he's talking about Muslims, or about this particular Muslim. He must be a secret Muslim still, or his bias towards Muslim is still there. Everyone's going to accuse me of bias somehow. When do you realize that I just have this empathy for everyone? Obviously not everyone. Like, there are bad people out there that I struggle to feel for, but still, I don't think I'm nice and loving and understanding towards AP any more than I would be anyone else. I don't think I'm biased towards ex-Muslims that way. If anything, I'm calling them out. I'm saying I disagree with them on these things. But there are people who do feel that way. They feel like this person's on our team, and as long as they're against the other team, I shouldn't point anything out that they do that's bad, or I shouldn't disagree with them. It should be a united front. I disagree with that.
which is ridiculous.
Yeah. That's how you end up in another echo chamber.
Yeah.
So no, there's nothing in particular about him that causes me to say what I say that seems too nice to you. Mohsen, thank you for
Oh,
this.
Mohsen. Hi, Mohsen. Good to see you.
Yeah, it says you guys are doing amazing work. Thank you for everything you do. Aladdin, I feel like you're the Eminem of it.
Eminem, the OG Slim Shady.
Is it because I'm talking so fast today? I'm beginning to feel like a rap god. Typical ex-Muslims, you disagree, they remove you from the chat. What is that person talking about? Yeah. Let's see. There's still a couple of questions on Instagram that I didn't get to, but Instagram likes to refresh, so I lost the questions. You have another one for me from the chat?
Let's see. Let's take a look. Someone had their Duolingo lesson. I'm on
Nice.
Duolingo too.
Same. How many days? What's your streak?
I'm almost at 100.
Nice. Keep
Wait
going.
until I tell you my father's streak. Oh my god.
How long?
I think he's nearing 2,000.
Wow.
Which
That
is
guy
insane to me.
learns. Is he getting better at the language or languages?
Oh yeah. He's learning
Yeah.
Spanish.
Nice.
It actually does work if you dedicate that. You just need to dedicate 2,000 days to it. Easy peasy.
Yeah. I mean, I've dedicated a long time to it. I don't know if I'm actually making that much progress, but at the very least, I'm not regressing, right? Like, it's keeping it somewhat fresh in my mind.
Moi Mimi is at 444 days and the boy is at 1436. Wow. Oh, there's one question from Mushi. If you were a type of condiment, what would you be?
If I was a type of condiment,
I don't even know how to.
sriracha?
I like this one. Well, I have an answer.
Mm.
So for me, I try to be balanced in everything, my perspective on things. So I would say that I'm sriracha because I have a little bit of that sweetness,
I
but
just
a
said
little
sriracha.
bit of that heat. Did you say sriracha?
I did, yeah.
I didn't hear you. I swear.
SubhanAllah. Ex-Muslims are a monolith. We cannot think for ourselves.
So yeah, sriracha for both of us, I guess.
Yeah, it goes in a lot of things. It's not really tied to one ethnicity these days. A lot of people enjoy it, so yeah, call me international. I'm sriracha.
Someone says you're mustard. Ethiopic Adelaide.
Mustard.
Yeah, you have a mustard vibe apparently.
All right, honey mustard or what kind of mustard? Just mustard.
Just mustard. Oh, so a couple of people are calling out Valentina hot sauce, which I've had. It's quite good.
Okay. No, I like sriracha more because it's more people can enjoy it. When sauce is too hot, some people can't deal with that. So,
Ahmed is Marmite, which I think is that Australian thing, if I'm not mistaken. That spread.
I thought that was marmalade.
No, that's something else. Marmite is. Oh, let me just look it up.
That was Vegemite. It's kind of like Vegemite.
Thick, salty, yeasty spread made from yeast extract.
Damn. Okay. You do you, man. Guess I wanted to point out a couple of these. Ahmed again. Typical ex-Muslims. You disagree, they remove you from the chat. He's still here. He's Marmite. This is ex-Muslim number one play. They say they're willing to discuss, blah, blah. The point is, I don't like saying this even about any group. Like, I don't like saying typical Muslim, they do this when this, that, even if it is typical and there is a trend there, because automatically it alienates that person from even listening to you. And it's just, us versus them again and again. So I don't say that about you folks. Try not to say that about us. There is no such thing as a typical ex-Muslim when most of them you haven't even met. But anyway, like you don't have to do that. You don't have to fight fire with fire and be like typical Muslim apologist. Though sometimes I feel it's fair to, kind of poke fun at the concepts of religious figures themselves. Like I could say typical argument in the Quran is straw manning the opposition. Like that I feel fair and square. Like, typical dawah person doing this and that. That feels a bit more alienating, but you could still say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to go now?
Still got a couple of minutes.
All right.
There's two things that I noticed in the live chat maybe you can address.
Sure.
So JJ was asking, did the Ramadan bring more sadness to your life when you first left Islam? I feel as though most ex-Muslims experience this.
In my case, not really.
In my case, yes and no. Like I was saying earlier, it was a little bit of, oh, well, this is just my life continuing now. But in retrospect, as the years passed, I think I did start missing just that feeling, that sense of belonging or feeling that I had with Ramadan when I was a kid, and how there was just nothing to replace it. So yeah, in that sense, it did make me sad. But the alternative was just pretending to be a believer or converting back, reverting. So it is what it is, and I tried to find community elsewhere, which I have done.
I mean, in my case, I say not really, not because I wasn't sad during that period of my life. I was, about everything going on with my identity with faith and identity crisis with faith and so on. But it's just that Ramadan wasn't particularly worse. I was already going through a tough time. If anything, it was nice to sometimes skip days of fasting when I really needed to, but then I feel guilty about it. It's a very complicated time, man. Yeah, I'm glad I'm not there anymore. And if you're there, trust me, things change. So give it time, find support, talk about it, and you will move forward in your life. It does not always have to be a sad time.
Yeah. There's one last thing maybe I can just talk about before I go. I don't know if you can find that comment or live chat. It was from Marius Jacob. They were talking about my recent video on the death of Samuel Paty. It starts with SS's video on conception of laïcité in France was quite biased and condescending, not gonna lie. It felt like another France's Islamophobic video I'm more used to seeing from Daoists online. Maybe I'll just kind of quickly explain that.
Sure.
So I talked about this horrible, horrific murder of this teacher in France. He was basically beheaded outside of his school. And it all started from him showing a couple caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad in his class. That's a long story short of it. And I talked in the video about the background, the history of what was going on in France and its approach to Islam and integrating Muslim immigrants. And a lot of it has to do with the concept, the belief in the principle of laïcité, separating religion from the state in France. And the point I was making was that there's been massive problems in integrating Muslim immigrants in France for decades now, and you could argue it's getting worse. And I think it's an oversimplification to just say that the issues of integration have to do with the Islam that these immigrants bring. I think there's a lot more variables going into it, and I would say, in my opinion, there's been instances where laws have been passed that are framed in the context of this laïcité, but are clearly targeting immigrants from a Muslim background to, how would I say it, to earn political points, and that potentially have racist undertones to them. And I would say that beyond Islam, there is clearly a racism problem in France, and a problem with exploitation of immigrants, not just from Muslim backgrounds, but from other backgrounds. And we have to look at that overall when we look at things like why Paty was murdered. We can't just focus on Islam and Islam only as the problem.
Right. Yeah, I get where you're coming from. It's really hard to make commentary on any issue like this. And if you reduce it to simple, this is the cause, then you're doing yourself and your audience and everyone a disservice, because it's never one thing. But I understand how it can sound almost like you're sympathetic to this one, to this one side, or this is reminiscent of religious propaganda. That's the problem with, getting. That's the problem with religious propaganda, is that when they're wrong most of the time, or when they have a lot of things that are wrong about their beliefs and their logic and how they got there, and then they have one thing that is actually not all that wrong, then it looks bad just because this person is known, or this entity is known to have bad beliefs. You know what I mean? So just because you agree with say Muslim propaganda on one thing doesn't mean that this thing is necessarily false. If you agree with them on everything, or if you're susceptible to everything they say, then maybe you really need to think about that. But if you just happen to agree on one thing, it doesn't mean that automatically that thing is false. That is why it upsets me when a lot of the news and advocacy and so on for Palestine comes from Muslim sheikhs, because I don't trust their credibility on anything. And they say, and they support a lot of messed up things as long as Islam allows it. But when it comes to this thing, if I agree with them, it looks like I'm on their side when I'm not on their side. We just have one opinion that is in common. So I hope that answers that. Just because you share an opinion with what you consider to be a bad person, or a person with bad judgment, doesn't mean that every opinion is wrong. A broken clock is right twice a day too. So
Yeah, and again, I just repeat what you were saying earlier, that we have to look at things with more nuance and beyond just blaming one thing or one religion or whatever for very complex issues. And I would say I actually support, generally speaking, the concept of separation of state from religion, whether it's the French form out of it or others. To me, it's more of a question of how it has been executed and what kind of discrimination has it led to.
Right. And as a commenter put it earlier, I can't find the comment, but clearly the French model of integration has failed, right? Because it's not working. And pointing that out doesn't mean that, oh, it's nobody's fault.
Or it's taking Islam off the hook and saying
right.
Islam is blameless. No.
This has nothing to do with Islam. No, it means that the way that it happened, there's so many factors that go into it. Islam is one of those factors. And how people react to people's religious beliefs and how welcome they are in general, religion aside, makes them more insular, less insular, and all that stuff. So yeah, there's more to it, and unfortunately, people don't like it when you say there's more to it. Sometimes people just like simple answers. But yeah, thank you, Lissa. That's
Lissa,
mahalo to both
wow,
of you.
thank you so much.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah. But right, I should go, but thank you again for having me on the channel. It was a pleasure. I liked the spicy questions. I liked the random questions. I didn't realize until now that I am sriracha this whole time.
Right.
Yeah,
Sweet
and yeah,
and spicy.
yeah. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, everyone. And oh, can I just see the results of the poll question before I go?
Yeah. Okay. So let's end
See.
the poll. You got 63% that say no.
63.
Ramadan will never be celebrated as a secular holiday like Christmas.
So yeah, roughly the same, a little bit more for you with the no's. So I did have the not sure option on my poll. So I think they're about similar. Yeah. What some people pointed out was maybe not for Ramadan as a whole, but for Eid by itself, it might become secularized, because it's kind of harder to just secularize and not practice an entire month. But a
Yeah.
one-off day like Christmas is with Eid, then yeah.
And maybe it'll start gradually, like Ramadan related food, will be a bit more common. It already is. It depends on what you consider to be Ramadan food, what
Yeah.
culture you come from. But like samosas, for example, they're not just a Ramadan thing, but for Arabs, they are a Ramadan thing. They're a bit different than the Indian samosas, but they're becoming a bit more popular. I see them sometimes in grocery stores. Who knows? Maybe
Hmm.
gradually there'll be a lot more Ramadan-esque elements that people kind of celebrate, but I don't know. I can't see the future. It'll take a while before that even happens.
Yeah.
But yeah. All right. Thanks
All
for
right.
joining us today. I'll make sure that the link for his channel is in the description, or just find him, Secular Spirit. Subscribe to him, and I'll continue taking some questions. But thank you for being here.
All right. Take care,
See you
everyone.
later. Bye bye.
See you around.
All right. Now the real fun begins. Now you can ask me the real spicy questions. I'm joking. Just same caliber of questions, please. Don't change. Maria says, how do you stop using words like wallahi and astaghfirullah, mashallah, bismillah when you speak in Arabic or darija in any Muslim country? Because I feel like a fraud. I don't know what ATP means. Zoomers, please tell me what ATP means. Well, you don't necessarily have to change the way you talk, at least not at once. You could change it gradually if you really want to, but you could just continue talking the same way that you're used to. You could change how you feel about it. You don't have to feel like a fraud, because it's said colloquially, like how people say Jesus Christ when they're surprised. I've said it before. I don't believe in Jesus. So you could just use it that way. You don't have to feel like a fraud just because you're saying it. But if it bothers you to say it, try to find alternatives and see what fits in the sentence instead of that. And gradually you'll change your vocabulary. But yeah, it doesn't have to be a big deal. It's you are the one who makes it a big deal or not a big deal. Nameless asks, when do you think an individual should tell their parents they decided to leave Islam? Depends on the person. It really, really depends on the person and their situation. For some people, they never tell their family, and it would not be safe for them to tell. For some, it's when they gain independence and when their parents view them as adults who are capable of making decisions for themselves. Um, it For some, it's immediately because they cannot live with the double life and the secrets that they hold. It really depends. But first and foremost, I urge you to not feel guilty about pretending to be a Muslim if you have to pretend. Obviously, you don't want to pretend forever, but if it's for your own well-being, do what is best for your well-being. Don't be too concerned about morally, I need to be open and honest about it, if it's going to be dangerous for you to be open and honest about your beliefs. So look out for yourself first and foremost, minimize the harm to yourself and others around you, and figure out when the best time for you is. But make sure that you have enough support and enough resources to be on your own if it comes to that. So keep that in mind, I suppose. Yeah, I hope that answers that. Um, Lily asks, I left not so long ago, but I still feel like I'm grieving the reward promised. I'm idealistic and those nice rewards are comforting. How do I deal with that? I felt that for a bit, that shock that, wait a second, there is no such thing as heaven. I'm not going to get to fly in heaven. I'm not going to get infinite whatever, the cars that I wanted, all that kind of stuff, or something less materialistic. Um, but I guess I try to think of it differently. You could have not existed, right? And I don't know your life in particular, but I would assume that there's enough good things that happen, or enough enjoyment, even in the little things, to be better than not existing at all. So in a sense, you already won the lottery. What if you think of this life as heaven? And heaven doesn't have to mean everything's good all the time forever and, just infinite everything. That's the idea of heaven we were sold. But what if you reframe it as I'm already in heaven because I get to exist? Because I could have been one of the many, reproductive cells that didn't make it, that the egg that wasn't fertilized, or the combination that never happened. So we're here. Um, Make the most of it, enjoy it as much as possible, because you already won the genetic lottery. I hope that helps. But yeah, what else? I guess I'll take a couple more questions. It's been a great live stream. It's been a great session. As promised, I will be making that donation. We hit that goal, so making that donation. Maybe I'll do this goal stuff more often. I remember when I first started the YouTube channel, I first started a Patreon. I made a promise that, you know, or I told people, and maybe it's still on my Patreon, if you sign up to donate to me $1 or whatever, euro or whatever currency, then donate the same amount to something else as well. And I hope that you're still doing that. I hope that you're donating to other causes, but every now and then I'll make sure that I'm doing that on my end too. So I appreciate it. I appreciate all the support. Ahmed says, different Ahmed than before. All the wonderful ex-Muslims, please learn a bit about financial management and basic investment. Without money, you're in trouble. Yeah, financial independence is important because if you live under someone's house and you need them to survive, they have a lot of power over you, and not everyone wields that power equally. Some people are, kind about it. Some people are really aggressive, and maybe they'll blackmail you and threaten to take away that support. So make sure that you know the person you're dealing with and your situation, and make sure that you look out for yourself. How would you recommend, Ferry asks, talking to children you're close to that are Muslim if you are not? Like, if they're complaining about being forced to pray and not celebrate fun holidays like Halloween, I feel out of respect for the parents' wishes, I tell them to just listen to their parents, but it internally feels icky to side with religion being forced like that, especially because I was once such the child or a child. It's very difficult to answer, honestly. Let me think about that for a second. I mean, my instinct would be to be a safe space for them. So you don't have to directly say, do it or don't do it. You can ask them to expand on their feelings. Why do you feel that way? Tell me more about how you feel. Have you tried expressing, that feeling to your parents? Obviously, parents are not going to budge when they express themselves, but maybe the parents will see that the child has feelings about it if you walk them through how to talk about their feelings, or just be a place where they can talk about it. And you don't necessarily have to say, go obey your parents, they know what's right for you. You could just listen to them and say, I hear you. I also would want to celebrate Halloween, or don't worry, I'll get you some candy. I want to see what outfit you would choose, that kind of stuff. Try to be their safe space, be what they wanted their parents to be without actually overriding their parents, if that is possible. I hope that answers that. I know it's really difficult to know what to do in that situation. Will you be going on lives during Ramadan, Aladdin? I love you. Thank you. Yes, I want to. I want to do a live stream every Wednesday, but man, I get lazy sometimes just working on the thumbnail, trying to find the topic, doing the research if I'm going to be dissecting a video. So if you could think of easy, live stream ideas like this, because I like doing this. I want to, make the content for the people, but I'm also working on the videos that I want to publish by the weekend typically. So if you can think of easy ideas or live stream ideas or titles that I could do again in Ramadan, happy to do this again. Every now and then I do a call-in live stream, but unfortunately, those don't seem to get a lot of views sometimes, though they're pretty fun to do. So maybe I'll do a bit more of those. Yeah. Reza says, I want to stop living a double life, but I'm anxious about the eventual falling out from those I hold dear. Feels like procrastinating the eventual rebuilding of my life has to be done, but still painful. Well, how about you do it gradually? I know it's hard to think of replacing your friends and family, but if you start to make friends, I don't know, maybe you already do, but keep making friends and connections outside of your religious group or your family. And if the day comes that you have to cut ties with certain people, or they cut ties with you, you still have a support system and it doesn't feel like you're all alone. And, so it doesn't have to be immediate. It could be gradual. Keep building a life outside of Islam. And yeah, Islam, someday you have to do it eventually, but As long as you have a support system outside of your family, you should be okay. It's hard, but you'll get through it. Jarawak asks, what do you consider easy ideas for you? I don't know. If I knew, I would I would have them already, but I'm open to suggestions. Yeah, I think we're about to wrap up. Give me one last question, Ramadan related. Let's make it Ramadan related. One last question. Mm-mm. There's a comment here about. Okay. Similar thing. Yasmin says, I was planning on continuing on fasting as an ex-Muslim to feel connected to my family, but ended up choosing not to for fear of other people thinking I'm Muslim. I see. So it's tricky. You want to have a connection with your family. You want them to maybe think that you're Muslim, or maybe you're out and you're just fasting. They know that you're out, but you're just fasting for solidarity. But you don't want other people to assume you're Muslim because you're not. And you don't want to be judged or viewed as someone who has beliefs that are Islamic because you don't have those beliefs. That is a very tricky situation to be in. Maybe you'll have to give two different answers to, the people who, yeah, why does fasting, I guess, what if you're mostly fasting, but you don't deny yourself a snack or whatever with someone who's not Muslim if they offer you one, or if they want to go for lunch or something? So from your parents' perspective, you're still participating. You just don't have to do it in front of them. But that's very tricky. Yeah, I don't really know what to do in that situation. Skyman says, do you think eradicating riba, such as interest, would greatly benefit societies? I can't answer that with a yes or no, because basically it's like saying, do you think if there was a whole other economic system, it would be better than this one? I'm sure there's a better economic system than the one that we have, that includes borrowing and lending and high interest rates and centralized banks that make all the money. But I'm no financial expert. I'm sure there's a better way to do it. But the Islamic way of like, just don't borrow, and there's maybe a Bayt al-Mal, like the house of money is what it literally translates to, but kind of a treasury, and people can borrow from it with no interest, is nice in theory. I don't know if it scales up. Hypothetically, would it be nice to have a place where you could borrow money without paying for it? Yes, but because we're human and people will exploit that, that's never going to work. So is there a universe without interest rates that, where the financial system that would be better than this? I'm sure it is conceivable. I hope someone conceives of it. But the way it's simply described in Islam, which is just don't have it, don't have interest, is not going to work. You know what I mean? Like it's too simplistic. It's like a utopian idea, but I would like to see it implemented in a better way. From my understanding so far of like Islamic banks or Islamic lending, it's not even that different. It's just reframing things to make it seem halal. Like if I remember correctly, don't quote me on this. I'm no expert, and this is not a video on Islamic banking. But back when I was in Saudi Arabia, someone had told me that, say you want to buy a car, but you don't want to pay for it in cash, right? Because not everyone has that kind of money. The bank buys it, and say the bank buys it for 70,000 riyals, for example. You then pay the bank 90,000 riyals or 80,000 or whatever the number in installments. That's interest. Like it may not be calculated the same way, it might be called the same thing, but you're buying it from the bank at a higher price in installments instead of using a bank and paying interest. It's the same thing. So I don't know if there is such a thing as an Islamic banking that is applicable and scalable. But in general, I'm not loving how capitalism is going for everyone. So yeah, it sure could use a change. Yeah. Any last questions about Ramadan? There's a suggestion for a channel that promotes the idea of eradicating riba. Sure, I'll check it out at some point. All right. That's it. That's all we have today for you folks. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you for the super chats. Thank you for participating. Leave a like, a comment after the video is over, maybe a timestamp of your favorite moments if you happen to remember that. And yeah, hope to see some of you on the Discord server if you decide to become members, or if you were gifted a membership. And thank you so much to all the supporters, the patrons, YouTube members, donors, members of the community. And oh my God, that's way too generous, Fairy. Thank you again. That is extremely generous. I might have to up my donation, my Zakat this month. Thank you, everyone. And as always, oh yeah, consider watching one of these videos next. And as always, think critically and think for yourself. Bye-bye, everyone.